So, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General, International Solar Alliance, Nilesh Shah, President, Bombay Chamber, and Group President and Managing Director, Kotak Mahindra AMC, distinguished speakers, past presidents, members of Bombay Chamber Board, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to express my sincere and heartiest welcome to each one of you for the second Sustainability Conclave. This year, the topic being climate tech for net zero. Unfortunately, a couple of hours back, the Union Minister for Environment and Climate Change, Shri Bhupendra Yadav, was called for an urgent meeting to the PMO, and he sent his regrets he couldn't join us today. That's the reason at the last minute we changed this from 2 o'clock to 2:30. His office conveyed that his best wishes are with us. So at the outset, on behalf of the chamber and my own behalf, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our speakers, various speakers throughout the day who would be with us. A special thanks to our sponsors, Hindustan Unilever Limited, HSPC, KPMG, and Excel Industries for supporting this event. Without their support, we wouldn't have been able to plan this. Last year, the Bombay Chamber conducted its first two-day sustainability conclave on the topic Target Net Zero. Shri Amitabh Kant, CEO, Niti Aayog, and Shri Bhupendra Yadav, Honorable Union Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, was the keynote speakers for the conclave. They even saw many eminent speakers from various industries share their thoughts with us. So let me also take a minute to talk about the Bombay Chamber. On the 30th of last month, we celebrated our 187th Foundation Day. We're the oldest chamber in India, formed by Britishers and some three-party gentlemen way back in 1836. And it's been a tradition from 1836 till now that the chamber has really been at the forefront of driving change, looking at how smaller MSMEs as well as large organizations benefit in trade and commerce, not only within India, but internationally. And we hope and plan to do this as we go along from here. So with that, I would like to hand this over to our president, Nilesh Bhai, for his opening comments. Nilesh Bhai, over to you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Good afternoon, Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General, International Solar Alliance, Shri Ashwin Bhai, Shri Sachin Bhai, distinguished speakers, past presidents, members of Bombay Chamber Board, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Last year, BCCI had organized a sustainability conclave, which brought many issues at the forefront. Continuing with our work towards creating a sustainable change at the ground level, this year we have organized a conclave, the topic Climate Tech for Net Zero. Kotak Mutual Fund was India's first mutual fund to sign up for UNPRI. This is a global alliance of more than 3,000 fund managers to ensure that we follow the principles of responsible investing under environmental, social, and governance. Our own knowledge in this field is fairly limited, and many a times we hear as contradictory research or opinions as there can be. We had one report which said that if India adopts net carbon zero goals, it will be adding X billion dollar of value to the GDP. It will increase GDP growth by Y%. At the same time, from the same company, there was a research report which advised United Kingdom not to follow net zero carbon because that will bankrupt UK. Now, we really don't know as an investor which research to follow. Undoubtedly, there is a need for net zero carbon. Global warming is real. All of us are experiencing this in climatic changes. All of us feel the need to ensure that we leave better earth for our kids than what we have inherited. Now, to achieve net zero, we need technology, we need solutions which can be executed on ground, and we need financing. Should there be cap, like absolute limit on carbon emission, or should there be per capita carbon emission limits? As the most populous nation on the earth, certainly China and India would like per capita rather than absolute limits. Should we take into account meter running today, or should we take into account past? How do we raise resources for financing net zero? There are so many challenges and so many issues. And the answer is not postponing any of those issues or any of those solutions. We have no option but to work on them and find executable, workable solution in order to ensure that we leave better earth for our kids than what we have inherited. I hope today's conclave will initiate dialogues on this crucial topic to enable us and the world to keep our commitment to reduce greenhouse emission and preserve the planet for our future generation. Dr. Ajay Mathur, Mr. Ashwin Bhai, Sachin Bhai, we have an esteemed lineup of speakers who are thought leaders in sustainability, and we are privileged to have them share their valuable insights on this topic. Looking forward to a thought-provoking conclave, and we hope we'll be able to persuade interested parties in using solutions emerging out of this conclave. Thank you. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Nilesh Bhai, for those opening remarks. I think all of them are relevant, and most of us listening to the panelists here have the same queries, and we don't understand much. So I think the experts are going to be able to, decipher some of it for us. Anirban also joined. Hi, Anirban. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Anirban is our the head of our committee on sustainability. So good afternoon. So now with that, I move on to for our keynote speaker, Dr. Ajay Mathur, to deliver his opening remarks. And I would just like to take a couple of minutes to introduce him. Dr. Ajay Mathur is the Director General of the International Solar Alliance. He earlier headed the Energy and Resources Institute, which is also known as TERI, and the Indian Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and was responsible for mainstreaming energy efficiencies in houses, offices, and industries through a number of innovative initiatives. He was a leading climate change negotiator and was the Indian spokesperson at the Paris Climate Negotiation. He served as the interim director of the Green Climate Fund, during its foundational period. At TERI, he has spearheaded the move to accelerate action towards low carbon and cleaner economy through the adoption of renewable energy in the Indian electricity sector, enhancing efficiency in buildings and industry, and promoting environmental quality through recycling of material waste and biotechnology-based solutions. He also anchored the annual World Sustainability Development Summit during his tenure at TERI. He was also a member of the Indian Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change and co-chair of the Global Energy Transition Commission. So with that, I hand this over to Dr. Mathur. Dr. Mathur.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and more importantly for inviting me to join you today. It is indeed a very difficult topic. As Nilesh Bhai just mentioned, the very fact that the same house can provide seemingly contradictory advice to India and to the UK is a case in point. In the community, there is a well-known aphorism that whatever you believe about climate change is true, and the opposite is true as well. It kind of tells us that more than the facts, we need to understand what underlies the facts. Neeraj Bhai pointed out the fact that for many countries, a global goal which is based on per capita emissions for India and China may be better, for others maybe an absolute number may be better. He also pointed out that we are looking at a transition to move away from climate change. What is very clear is that climate change is real and is happening. Many, many years ago, in the late 1990s, the first global climate models were created. And amongst the things that they showed were the changes in the Indian rainfall pattern. And they said that initially at least means till about 2050, we will see the rainfall over India remain constant, but it will be more volatile. That means when it rains, it will rain very much. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of dry days. That is exactly what has happened. It has taken something like 20 or 30 years or 25 years for that to be shown. But a paper that was brought out by the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology looked at the rainfall in the last 5 years in 142 places, I think, if I'm not wrong, and came to the conclusion that there was a very, very slight decrease, a statistically insignificant decrease in the rainfall across the country. However, what was statistically significant was that the number of rainy days had decreased. The point I'm making is that many of the predictions that were made even early in the climate change debate are now coming true. In other words, as we look at our businesses, as we look, no matter what those businesses are, whether they're industry, whether they are finance, in all these sectors, we are looking at the future benefits being curtailed by the negative impacts of climate change. So whether it is higher temperatures or a higher amount of rainfall, or if you're on the coast, then the number of cyclones don't change, but the cyclones become stronger. This means that we need to look at investments afresh. We need to look at investments that we have made, and we need to look at investments that we will make. What is important is that as we move to net zero, and India has made a commitment to go to net zero by 2070, as we move to net zero, then in all the sectors, we look at investment strategies that complement the larger physical strategies of moving to a future in which we do not use fossil fuels, amongst other things. Is that possible? Yes, it is possible. In the area that I work in, solar energy, we have seen a great growth. Solar electricity is now the cheapest electricity in most geographies in the world. Earlier in this year, I used to say in 25 geographies. Now that number has gone up to something of the order of 71 countries of the world. Solar electricity is the cheapest electricity. Yet, it is cheapest only when the sun is shining. Again, Nilesh Bhai, one of those cases where what you're saying is correct. Solar is the cheapest, but it is also the most expensive when the sun is not shining. Consequently, what becomes important is that during the non-sunlight hours, we do depend on fossil fuels for electricity generation. Coal in India, gas in the United States, and so on. It is important, therefore, to very quickly move to methods through which even at night, renewable energy can be available on a as demanded basis. The best way to do it is through storage systems, in particular, the storage systems that are associated with batteries, but they could also be pumped storage. It could also be storage which is based on flywheels and so on. We at the International Solar Alliance, looking at the international trends and the R&D that is happening, have come to the conclusion that over the next 3 years, 2023, 2024, and 2025, we will see the price of batteries come down fast enough so that solar plus batteries will provide us electricity that is cheaper round the clock than coal-based electricity. What it means is that if we are investing in coal-based electricity, it is a goner. It's a goner in financial terms. It's certainly a goner in climate terms. Last year, for example, in the year 2021, approximately $200 billion were invested in solar electricity across the world. However, and this is something that I will keep on saying, and I'll come back to it at the end. However, one of the problems with this is its geographical distribution. 74% of the investment was in the OECD countries and in China. All of Africa got 5% of the investment, which therefore implies that while a large amount of the new electricity generation capacity that is occurring in the OECD countries, where there's maturity of electricity supply in any case, and therefore we are really talking of the retirement of old plant and the setting up of new plant, we are not seeing solar electricity come in the areas where there is the highest solar insolation or the largest growth in demand for electricity. On the other hand, when you look at countries like Germany or Denmark, there isn't great solar insolation, but they are amongst the largest solar users in the world. This, to me, captures our central dilemma. And this is what I'd like to focus on as we go ahead. I would, just as I focused on the power sector, I would like to focus on the industry sector and then on the building sector, and then come to what are the kinds of issues that we need to address. When I look at industry, investment in climate technology, in the broad sense of the word, is showing relatively strong growth. And as an asset class, we have seen something like more than $87 billion invested in the second half of 2020, H2 of 2020, and H1 of 2021. So that means in the year middle of 20 to the end of 2021, $87.5 billion were invested in this asset class. The first half of 2021 alone delivered investment levels in excess of $60 billion US. And so not only is it increasing, it is large, but it is increasing quarter by quarter, half year by half year. So if you look at the investments in H2 of 2020 and H1 of 2021, and you compare it with the investments 1 year before, we see a 210% increase in this period. I would suggest that this is important. It needs to be noted. But what is also happening is that it's not that as if this is a large number of fragmented deals. The deal size has also quadrupled in this period and has grown from an average of about $27 million in the years 1920 to an average of about $96 million in the years 2021. So mega deals are now becoming increasingly common and are driving much of the recent top line in funding investment growth in climate tech. In my view, what this is showing is that the market is turning. What it is also seen is some special tools, some special instruments. For example, there is a tool that has come up which is called the Special Purpose Acquisition Company, SPACs. And you will be very familiar with the SPACs, but it is really around climate tech that they developed. So this innovative finance tool really developed around the growth that is occurring in the climate tech sector. This new fundraising approach is responsible for driving a significant proportion of the climate tech, increasing from $28 billion in the second half of 2020 and first half of 2021. So what we have seen is the deals are increasing, the size of the deals are increasing, and the special instruments are being created to make this happen. What are the sectors where this is happening? What we are seeing is again a skewedness. I talked of the power sector earlier, but here what we are seeing is mobility and transport sectors. This is the areas where the highest investment in climate tech is occurring, and the investment has been in this period of second half of 20 and first half of 2021 has been about $58 billion. So 58 of the 87 is here. This is 2/3 of the total. So electric vehicles are dominant. Low GHG emission vehicles are dominant, and they have raised about 33 of the $58 billion that we spoke about. Now, the mobility and transport sectors continue to receive the largest amount of funding. Electric vehicles, micro-mobility, and other innovative transit modes are the places where the vast amount of this funding is occurring. Now, this has, there's also been growth, and in terms of growth, in terms of year-to-year growth, there has been significant growth in the industry sector, in the manufacturing sector, and in the resource use-based industries. And but the numbers pale in comparison. The numbers for the 2021 are about $7 billion compared to the $58 billion for mobility and transport. And I'll come back to this skewedness a little while later. So power was the first thing that I discussed, industry was the second. And the third thing that I want to discuss is on the buildings sector. In the building sector, we have seen that alternative and low carbon building materials are being used more. We did not see a large investment in this sector, possibly of a few $billion, $3 or $4 billion. But what we did see was that the reason why this was counted was because of the use of alternate building materials. So where is it that all of this is happening? And this is a geography issue that I addressed. US remains the dominant geography for this investment in the 2021 period. So approximately 2/3 of all funding, approximately $56 billion, was in the US. China saw about $9 billion in climate tech investment in the same period, and Europe was about $18 billion. Now, this is interesting because it shows you the relative scales of investment, and it also tells you something that I'll come again later. It tells you of the ecosystem for investing that occurs in these different geographies. So it is important to note that 3 of the 5 major investment hubs are in the US. The Bay Area, New York, and Boston. The other 2 of the top 5 are London and now Berlin. This is again interesting because we had earlier assumed that the European growth would be Frankfurt based, but it is becoming Berlin based. And I don't know the reason why this is happening, but I would very much like some amount of thinking as to why this change is occurring. So, but the point that I'd like to make is that this investment is occurring in 5 hubs, and therefore there is an opportunity to shift capital towards solutions with untapped climate potential. So, of the 15 technology areas, the top 5, which amongst themselves represent about 80% of the future emission reductions potential, they received just 25% of the climate investment. So clearly, we are waiting to see where the investments will occur in the steel sector, in the cement sector, in the petrochemical sector, in the building sector, and so on. Now, this climate tech investment has also led to a large growth in climate tech unicorns. The interesting thing is that as you look at the growth of investors who have invested in climate technology, it is very interesting that we see a large number of climate tech unicorns. We have seen 43 in the mobility and transport sector, in the food and agricultural sector, about 13, industry, manufacturing, resource use, 10, and in the energy sector, which is a highly regulated sector, 9. These are largely as replacements of petroleum business, not so much as replacements of electricity business. Though there is one which is also on the production of solar cells. So what I'd like to ultimately focus on is that we are looking at a very diversified field, but we require far more diversification. We require diversification geographically. I spoke of the complete neglect of Africa. I also spoke of the concentration in the transport and mobility sector, and hence to move into other sectors as well. So we specifically would like to see how we can look at industry, manufacturing, and resource management, and the built environment. These are areas where in countries like India, the growth is occurring very fast. In the mobility and transport sector, as Anirban will attest, the largest growth is in the private vehicle sector, not so much in the public sector. Similarly, in the industry, manufacturing, and resource management sectors, and in the built environment sectors, the largest growth is in the private sector. We therefore need to see how we can have more climate tech growth in these particular sectors as far as India is concerned. So, as far as industry is concerned, the major issue that we see is optimizing their production processes and supply chains so that obviously you get lower costs, obviously you get lower carbon emissions, going to zero carbon emissions, and at the same time, the chances for customer service improvement are also there. That is what is going to drive the change. And it is my expectation that local pollution control will now start playing an ever greater role in this sector, and therefore waste and emission streams, whether they're solid waste or liquid waste, would also start playing a role in how we are looking at the future. And this might be one of the reasons for climate technologies to be able to take off. Without giving names, a large German company, which is also present in India, what they did was they put sensors on a lot of manufacturing equipment in China. So they were able to develop a lot of analytics software, and this helped their engineers to improve yields and predict breakdowns while they're still trying to take remedial actions. These were in addition to the lower climate or zero climate benefits that they got. Similarly, when we look at additive manufacturing processes like 3D printing, we look at augmented reality. These are all ways in which the transaction costs associated in bringing new technologies to the market become far quicker and far cheaper. I would like to argue that the same is true of the built environment space. The closed economy is far more important in this sector than almost any other sector that I can think of. And consequently, building information modeling, regenerative design, which creates, which upgrades resources than the building consumes, and water conservations are the factors around which the low emissions or zero emissions or climate tech technologies take hold. I'd like to end by pointing out that in all of these latter sectors, the key challenge continues to be R&D. Because yes, we are looking at the technologies that are available in the market today, but making them India specific requires R&D that is essential in order for those technologies to be able to meet the kinds of development demands. You know what I just talked about, the closed loop economy, the fact that we are looking at additive technologies. Now these need to be tailored to India. And for the market pull, so if you want this technology, how do you get it? For the market pull to be effective, we need to ensure that, number one, investors, industry and financiers invest in the R&D. They invest in the R&D and they invest in business models. I again look at Anirban and look at the kinds of emphasis that the Mahindra Group has placed on the new business models. And I think it tells us that that the business models of tomorrow may not in every case be similar to the business models of yesterday. And finally, the last point that I would like to make is around venture capital. We need more patient capital from early stage venture capital investors. This is the only way that future breakthroughs can be achieved and brought in sync with the longer term strategic plans at the industry level and the targeted policy measures of the governments. For example, whether you have a long-term net zero goal, and in the short term, whether you have regulatory provisions or whether you have carbon pricing provisions. They're also necessary to kickstart the investment that is needed in the hard-to-abate sectors. And this is the steel, the cement, the petrochemicals that I spoke about. In all of these areas, we are waiting for the developed countries to develop technology. For example, in the steel sector, instead of using coal for coking coal for the manufacture of for the reduction of iron into iron ore, we could use hydrogen. Now, this is being tried out in Sweden, but we have not seen any new trials being done in India, despite the fact that we are looking at tripling the steel manufacturing capacity in this country by 2035. I would like to end by saying that conclaves like this are very important, because more than anything else, they bring together people to start answering the questions that Nilesh Bhai had said right in the beginning, to provide the kinds of tools that are necessary to look at the so-called contradictory answers that are provided at different points of time. I would urge you to look beyond the industry sector to academia, to policymakers, so that we can have places where the language that is used is such that it becomes common to everybody, instead of having different languages being used in these different vertical silos. That in turn would lead to common expectations. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Mathur, for those entire analysis. Before we move on to the next panel, we have a couple of questions which we can take, and I would request if any of our panelists have questions. Anirban, do you have a question? Nilesh Bhai, Mr. Shroff, anyone has a question for Mr. Mathur?
Okay, so let me get this started. Dr. Mathur, thank you very much for the address. From your addresses, one gets a sense of how things are moving. All the information you shared on investments being made today is a welcome step forward. We haven't heard this conversation before. I'm sure it will accelerate in future. The question that I want to ask you is, given the fact that there is so much opportunity for climate action in India, what can we do to trigger investments and real action in the sectors that matter?
Mr. Mathur, you're on mute. If you could please kindly unmute. Yeah.
So, Anirban, thanks very much for the question. And it's something that we have been addressing, and you and I have been talking about this also. The answer is slightly different for, say, the transport and mobility sector, is somewhat different for the industry sector, is somewhat different for the hard to abate sectors. If you look at the transport sector, I think we are seeing there are two issues. One is the availability of technologies themselves. And in this area, we are at a space where technologies are available. The questions that are being raised are around charging facilities. And the questions of whether charging facilities would be available in rural areas, if so, when? And what would be the price at which they would be available. But in urban areas, we are seeing that, at least as far as two-wheelers are concerned, we are seeing a growth in electric two-wheelers. My view is that we need to focus on charging stations which use, for example, solar or other renewable energy for the charging process. So there is a technology part to it. There's a second part, which is a financing part. And nobody knows better than you that the financing really occurs on the backs of the balance of the balance sheets of successful companies. So, which is why I think we need money to come in from patient capital, from venture from venture capitalists, which allow developers to have the kind of cash flow that they need in order to move ahead. The second is, as far as industry is concerned, where we are really talking of looking at, in a sense, electrifying the heat needs. And this is not a big deal, but this will largely be driven by regulation more than anything else. Yesterday, the Energy Conservation Act was discussed in the Rajya Sabha and passed. And I think now, with the passage of the Energy Conservation Act, we have a tool which will start requiring action, not only in terms of energy efficiency, but also in terms of carbon emissions. What is the speed, etc., I don't know, but at least the tool is now in place. The last point refers to the hard to abate sectors, cement, steel, petrochemicals, etc. Here, the key challenge is business models, because one of the biggest challenges is, yes, you can, for example, use hydrogen, but where do we get the hydrogen from? Will hydrogen be available? Will I have to invest in it? Will I have to sell it? Can I buy it like I buy diesel? Those are questions which are still grappling, because like all other renewable energy investments, the capital costs are very high, the operating costs are lower. This implies that for the consumer to take over the entire cost is difficult. These will be entrepreneurs. And business models through which they can provide services to users would be the way ahead. So I'm sorry, this is not a complete answer, Anirban, but I hope that it provides at least some space to start thinking.
Some clues, certainly, Dr. Mathur. Thank you very much. Sandeep, we've got some questions now.
Yeah, I know, but Anirban, we are short of time.
Yeah.
So what we'll do, if Mr. Shroff has a question, we could take that. Otherwise, what I'll do is I will post these questions to Dr. Mathur and then have them relayed back to all the people who asked this question.
Wonderful. Dr. Mathur, I'm partial to Usha's question on climate education, given my transition to the education space in the near future.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you all very, very much.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Mathur, once again for your time with us today. Before we move on to our first panel, I would once again like to thank our sponsors, Hindustan Unilever Limited, HSPC, KPMG, and Excel Industries. Like I mentioned earlier, this wouldn't have been possible without their contribution. Now I invite our moderator for the session, which is panel discussion on emerging climate tech. Our moderator, Swapna Gupta, partner, Havana Climate and Sustainability Fund. The panel members, Abhay Singh, CEO, Eki Foods, Ankit Jain, CEO, Step Chain, Hemant Aluru, CEO of Turno, and Mr. Anshuman Bafna, CEO, Terra.do. So Swapna, we have roughly 50 minutes. So, the way you want to moderate it, leaving, at least 5 to 10 minutes for some question answers as well. So over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Samdeep, and thank you, Bombay Chamber, for this opportunity. It is a pleasure to be here and see a full house. It's also heartening to hear and see the increasing razor-sharp focus on sustainability and climate tech in the previous keynote. If only I had a penny for every time I heard the word climate tech, honestly. I think how we look at it is we are honestly the last generation which is seeing impact of climate change and can do anything about it. And thankfully, there are no more any climate deniers. I agree with the previous speaker where Dr. Mathur talked about how we need to build towards a more sustainable climate resilient India, as well as need for patient capital. And we at Havana Capital are a team of technology investors and operators who have been investing for decades in the ecosystem. And now our full-time job is to invest in climate technology. We are at an opportune time to build for climate as an entire ecosystem has come together, including if you think about how enterprises have become more discerning, consumer is more than ever thinking about how can they bring the right change. Policy and regulatory has been very supportive. While we think about all the ecosystems coming together, we are also doing our own bit by partnering with some of the best founders using cutting edge technologies to solve for climate. Some of them have joined me here, so we'll hear them shortly. At Havana, our climate investments are across the 3 key areas which will move the needle, which are 90% of India's emissions, are a major part of our GDP today. And these are areas around energy and other resources, which could be waste, water, soil. We're also investing a lot around mobility and supply chain because think about it, mobility is still diesel powered for many generations now. It needs to change. And agri and food system. Without much ado, let's hear from some of the best-in-class entrepreneurs here about their individual journeys, how they have gone about it, and how they are looking to change the future. What we can start with is we can have each of Abhay, Ankit, Hemant, and Anshuman share their background, the company background, what they are building. And maybe we can do this alphabetically. Abhay, start with you, Ankit, then you, Anshuman, and then Hemant.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you, Swapna. I'm actually very delighted to be here and presenting what we have been building at Eki. And prior to that, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Abhay Singh. I graduated from IIT Bombay 2014 batch, and I have a degree in medical science. And I've mostly been working in the domain of robotics and automation. But almost 3 years into the job, we kind of figured out and realized how difficult it is going to be for everyone to get access to a high quality food and at a cheaper price, or let's say at a conventional prices. And this is what we actually started to solve. We tried all kinds of farming. We did all kinds of research that was done in farming, organic farming, conventional farming, hydroponics farming. And the problem was like very, very apparent. Agriculture currently constitutes to 17% of greenhouse gas emissions. And 70% of our fresh water goes to agriculture, out of which 60% goes to waste. Adding to that, about a week back, the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations they published a study which said that 33% of Earth's soils are already degraded, and over 90% could become degraded by 2050. And we also have to take that account, but we also have to account the fact that we are reaching a population of almost 9 billion by 2050. So overall idea was to make sure we do not wage wars just because of not access to a good high quality produce. And we do not spend time in hospitals, and in fact, working ourselves to solve this climate change as a whole. And that's what we figured, that we should actually start with farming and solve that area. So at the key, what we have done, we have actually emulated whatever the soil provides for the best possible growth of all kind of staple veggies, like which are indigenous to our diets. If you talk about cucumber, tomato, muskmelon, everything that we eat on a daily basis, chilies, eggplant, and we make sure that these are produced at the highest nutrition value possible by saving 90% of the water. That can be grown at a mandi prices on a barren land. And this was our core, like this was our guiding principle, to have nutrition, to have sustainability, and be cost effective, to be able to compete with mandi prices. And we have fortunately been able to expand to 40 acres right now, and working in the most difficult terrain, I would say, in Rajasthan, where the temperature is from 3 degrees Celsius to 48 degrees Celsius. And even in those areas, we have seen floods. Even in these areas, we've also seen a very high winds, not access to any kind of water. In fact, in one of the areas, we have actually built like 2 crore liters of pond just to irrigate 2 acres of farm. And so all these realities, we could see all these realities firsthand. And I think we would be able to solve at least a part of the problem of food. And this is what our aim is. So thank you. Yeah, this is.
Thanks, Abhay, for solving for food security. Like they say, you take notice when the problems comes to your food table, dining table. So thank you for solving for it. Over to you, Ankit. We would love to hear your company background, your background to do this.
Sure. Thanks, Sapna, and thanks to the Bombay Chamber of Commerce for inviting me today. Hey guys, my name is Ankit. I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Step Change, a climate tech startup which I'll talk about. My background's mostly been a mix of technology and consulting. And my last stint before starting Step Change was I used to run an electric vehicle company called Ola Electric. Now, what we are trying to do at Step Change in the long term is essentially build what we call climate decision-making tools. Our hypothesis is that over time, every organization in their move towards net zero and the move towards becoming more sustainable will push decision-making from top down to day-to-day decisions that their employees will have to take around product development, around vendor selection, because just like today, every decision has a financial consequence. Every decision which has a climate consequence needs to be part of your carbon budget, and you need to account for that. So over time, those are the sets of tools that we are building. So tomorrow, as you think about product development as an FMCG firm, or you're thinking about vendor selection as an automotive firm, how do you make the decision with climate in mind? Our starting point today is to solve for helping companies really go deep on their scope 3 emissions, because that's almost 85 to 90% of emissions that a company has, and understand that and make that part of their reporting and measurement and analysis and reduction plans. So we're essentially helping large corporations, financial institutions accelerate their transition to net zero through a set of SaaS tools that we built.
Thanks, Ankit. You've chosen one of the hardest problem of scope 3 emissions, which the world has transmuted to us in some sense. Let's hear Anshuman and how he's building his army of soldiers to solve for climate.
Thank you, Sapna. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone and in the Bombay Chamber of Commerce, and great to see fellow entrepreneurs here in this audience too. I live in Stanford, California, so this is a bit of an odd hour, but it's an exciting time for all of us who are working in climate right now. My own personal story has been that I have been a tech entrepreneur all my life, started 4 companies, sold 2 of them. Last, I was chief product officer at Make My Trip. So nothing to do with the climate at all. And then a classic midlife crisis about 2.5, 3 years back, started looking at how I could take my skills and start working in climate, and realized that the answer was not easy. So spoke to lots and lots of people, everything from nuclear fusion to environmental justice, not just in India and the US, but all across the world. And the 2 big insights were that it wasn't really clear where to even begin if you wanted to take your skills and start working in climate. And second, more importantly, that the scale of transformation we were talking about meant that we were talking about changing how we do energy, agriculture, transportation, manufacturing, construction, even horizontals like finance. And this entire transition, I call it the climate transition, for the entire global economy had to happen in 10 to 20 years. And the scale would be hundreds of millions of people either finding new climate jobs or upskilling themselves, taking their existing roles and becoming climate and sustainability champions wherever they are. And it felt like nothing like that existed. So that's how we ended up starting this company, Terra.do. We think of ourselves as a ramp that will take 100 million people who are currently outside climate and sustainability and get them start working in climate. And that's our simple goal, to get 100 million people working in climate this decade. And the way we do that is we combine 3 different things. We combine, first of all, learning. So we run a bunch of different online and in some cases hybrid programs all across the world that upskill individuals. And they could range from a program for oil and gas upstream professionals looking to work in clean energy, to a program on hydrogen for energy executives and so on. We also surround all of them with what is soon the largest job board and jobs platform for climate jobs. And most importantly, we stitch it all together into a global online community through an app and a website that we have. So in the 2 years that we've been around our programs, we have graduated about 3,000 plus people, mid-career professionals from all across the world, about 40% US, but about 25 to 30% India. And these individuals have gone on to do incredible things in climate and sustainability across every single sector possible. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build something that looks almost like a LinkedIn for climate, and trying to get as many people as possible, whether they're sitting inside corporations or starting companies, to start taking the skills into climate.
Thanks, Anshuman. A small plug there. If nobody has taken the Terra course here, you must. Some of us at Avana have taken it and have learned a lot in the process. So definitely do look up Terra.do. Let's talk to Hemant and how he's taking us towards a more electric future, and what is his background and the company's background.
Thank you, Swapna. Thank you so much for the opportunity to Bombay Chamber of Commerce here. My background, I started out, I graduated as an engineer, and then I went into finance. I did private equity investing for about 5 years. Luckily, during that time, I've had a lot of close interactions with very new emerging technologies back then. EV technology back in 2007-8 was just kind of starting to become mainstream. I think from that time, there was some innate interest in the broader technology. While I can't call myself an automotive whiz, I was always attracted to that. So I wanted to do something in that space for the longest time. After that, I came back to India. I ran a kind of a chemical distribution business, very orthogonal to whatever I was doing before and after. and then eventually decided that I wanted to do something broadly speaking in the environmental space. For a while, I was helping a bunch of different NGOs around taking action towards broader environmental protection, and then realized that activism was probably not, at least in my opinion, the right approach to providing long-term sustainable solutions. Around that time, I got introduced to a shared mobility platform, Zoomcar, who had we all had kind of similar ideas around how shared mobility could impact broader reduction of vehicular pollution and emissions. And on top of it, we wanted to build an electric vehicle layer. We tried doing that. In fact, we had a pretty successful run of doing that, but we could not scale that business up within that entity. And around that time, we realized, and that's where I met my co-founder, Sudhir, he was the COO there. We kind of realized that if you wanted to build for kind of broadly speaking electric mobility as a solution, you need extremely fundamental DNA elements in the company, which only solve for that, because the opportunity that the technology presents is effectively to create new business models. And that's, at least we believe, the only way for us to take the electric vehicle technology to as many people as possible. So we started Turno. What at Turno we do is, within the broader mobility spectrum, we focus only on the commercial vehicle space today. And the reason is that while we all talk a lot about two-wheelers and kind of cars, in India, all of that constitute less than 10% of fuel consumption. So it's really not a problem, in our opinion, to solve at this point in time. It's good to do it, but it is really not changing the needle, moving the needle around broader pollution on the or even emissions at the large scale, right? Commercial vehicles constitute majority of that, and they need very specific solutions, which involve having to disrupt multiple value chains to be able to provide meaningful solutions to customers. So we basically find cheaper ways to distribute the vehicles and lower the prices of vehicles for customers. We kind of work on financing solutions without which customers basically cannot acquire these assets. And we kind of also work on creating deeper asset markets, which provides effectively the support for selling and financing the vehicle. So basically we do the entire promise of cost of ownership, we deliver to the customer on a platter. So that's what we do. We basically sell vehicles, we finance vehicles, and we provide asset value guarantees on vehicles. Yeah, we've been doing this now since Jan of this year. We started operations in April. Today, we probably are, by a single entity, probably the largest seller of vehicles in the categories that we operate in the country.
Thanks, Hemant. Hopefully, we get to 50% electric in next 10 years and 100% electric over time. Let's hear your story, Abhay. I'm just curious. You're sitting in Kota where there is no airport. You're building one of the hardest problem, probably a good technology problem to solve for. Of course, your background story of why you chose to do this and did not pick up one of the fancier jobs in, say, Bangalore, Bombay, and sit out of Kota and do this. But also how technology is a differentiator, what else is happening globally, and how does EKI, I mean, I hear a lot of conversations here happening across the world, not only India, of how food security is a global problem and you can come there and solve for those places. So talk through your journey and how you see this technology being a differentiator, not only locally, but also globally.
Yes, thank you. So one of the important factors that led me to actually quit my last job, which was in Bangalore, was that I could not see a vision with the work that we were doing. And in fact, I was developing these IoT devices for a two-wheeler rental startup company. And so they were working with petrol and diesel bikes, not electric. And no, so I actually spent, like, after quitting the job, I spent like 6 months reading philosophy, reading geography, reading history. And one of the patterns that I figured out was that, like, most of the wars were fought either for water, land, or food. And I didn't want my children, as in our next generation, to be in that scenario at all. So if you talk about French Revolution, that started with bread. If we talk about 1971 war, that started with the migration of people from East Pakistan to Assam and Bangladesh. West Bengal and Assam. Like it all happened with a food security problem. It all happened with not access to good quality food. And I could see that this is one of the problems that even if I wanted to spend like thousands of years, it will not be solved. So that was like the very first motivator of starting this, very well knowing that it is very critical for all the health, being of our civilization. And then we actually spent almost 2 years trying all kinds of convention and the latest technology involved in farming. We tried controlled manner farming. We tried this hydroponics. We tried cocoa peas based farming. We tried organic farming, and we were reading this government reports, which basically said. So the last government actually instituted this Dalmia committee to explore the doubling of farmers' income by adopting organic farming, the soil-based organic farming, and they figured that it would take about 9 years to reach pre-conventional yield. And there is also like multiple studies from different universities which basically said, in order to feed everyone by 2050, you'll have to cut down 20% of the current forest. Now, and this is not just one study. There are like hundreds of studies out there. And we figured that, okay, then we kind of knew that organic is not the solution. Then we tried understanding why people who are doing into, like at a global scale, they are proposing controlled managed agriculture or hydroponics as a new way of farming. But all of them, like every single one of them, is actually limited to a certain crop, mostly the leafy vegetables. And all of them, even in Middle East, there's a company called Pure Harvest. They grow tomatoes, and even for the standards of Abu Dhabi, which has one of the highest GDP per capita, their produce is being sold at a premium, not at the conventional rate. And I'll tell you that the conventional rate of Abu Dhabi is at least 5 times more that of India. So we kind of figured that this is not going to solve any problem. And then we spent another 1 year, like understanding what are the limiting factors. Why are these people not able to grow Indian veggies? And if they are able to grow, why are they not able to sell at Indian prices, at mandi prices? And this is where technology came in. So when we talk about growing, let's say a winter crop, let's say we grow okra. Okra is sold in the month of November, December, harvested in the month of March, April. Now it can't be grown in the winter season. Sorry, it can't be grown in summers. It can't be grown in monsoon season. That's because like every plant requires its own climate. It requires its own temperature, humidity. Now, all the companies that were involved in doing or farming this controlled environment agriculture, that is what controlled environment agriculture means. They were using artificial, they were using chillers, they were using blowers, like they were using air conditioners. And this is where they were saying that we are deploying this large scale solar farms to fulfill our energy needs. But that initial capex was too high, and the interest cost of that initial capex led to the very high growing cost, like the high growing operating cost. And and this is where actually my a study came very helpful. Like my graduation become very helpful. So if you talk about chillers, if you talk about air conditioners, if you talk about any controlled environment techniques, instead of actually using them, there are materials which can replicate the exact same thing without the use of any electricity. So, and there are materials out there, like we use them on a daily basis. Let's consider example of a ceramic cup. Now, it doesn't matter how hot the tea or coffee is inside a ceramic or a cup, you don't feel the heat on your palm. That is because the ceramic has a very good thermal conductivity. Now, I'm using this analogy to say that there are other methods which can actually provide the benefits of air conditioning blowers without all of the capex, without the use of any electricity, and help us grow all the veggies throughout the year, and that too at mandi prices. So what we essentially do use is what we've built over the past 4 years is a certain polymer composite. This polymer composite helps us to create this temperature difference of 15 degrees Celsius. So let's say you build a car with our polymer composite, and let's say the car was outside in the sun for 2 hours. You'll have to turn on AC, but with our composite, let's say the outside was 40 degrees Celsius, 40, inside would be 25-degree temperature inside the car. And this is again without the use of any electricity, without air conditioner, anything. And this material science, this polymer composite is actually helping us to grow like all kinds of veggies, as I said, at mandi prices on a barren land. Now, when actually I talk about the work that we're doing in Rajasthan, in Kota, like people actually say that it's actually your disadvantage that there's no airport. There is actually no airport in Kota, and it's not easy to travel, to meet people, to meet investors. But the benefit of being Kota was that now I can say I'm able to grow these Indian veggies at temperature throughout the year, which in an area where the temperature goes from 3 degrees Celsius to 48 or 50 degrees Celsius, with a high wind blow, with a high monsoon, everything. And with that, like geography mindset, I've had investors, not even from India, but actually outside India, from US, from Japan, to come and visit and see the farms.
Yeah.
So these constraints were actually helpful for us to display that the work that we have done and built is something that we can do throughout the world and not just India terrain. And if we talk about India terrain, we have been able to do it, as I mentioned, like the conventional prices are almost 4 times in Middle East. Now, imagine shifting this tech, not shifting this, but building a replica of this tech in Middle East and growing that quality of veggies at that prices.
Thanks, Abhay. Abhay, I know I am just cognizant of our time, but thanks, Abhay, for that story. Yeah. Thanks, Abhay, for that story. Every time I talk or hear about this, I feel I'm in a movie Martian already. So thanks for building this futuristic technology for all of us. Ankit, over to you. Curious, you're building for Scope 3. Anyone and everyone you talk to will tell you that it is the hardest problem to solve for. And of course, you're building for that. Tell us, how do you think India is the right place to build for it? What are some of the innovations you and your team is doing to build for it? And of course, there are a lot of global companies already, Normative, Watershed, etc., building. How will this be different? And of course, Bombay Chamber of Commerce is a great audience where there are a lot of enterprises already struggling with this every day. So it will be good to hear your perspective.
Okay. So let me start first, Swapna, by why India. Right. So I think of course, we all know that India is the 3rd largest emitter in the world. But given how low our per capita emissions are, they're only expected to increase. And if you think about 2030, 2040, 2050, most of India is yet to be built. Right? Most of our power infrastructure, our industry, our vehicles, our agriculture is yet to be built. And with that in mind, if we can build it right, we can really enable a move towards net zero globally. If India doesn't get it right, there is no way the rest of the globe can achieve its net zero targets, right? So India is definitely a very important part of getting it right globally. That said, our focus, again, as a company is global. We're starting from India, but most supply chains today, if you think about it, are global in nature. Even Indian companies building in India have global supply chains, right? So there is no way, when you're thinking about scope 3 especially, you can be limited to any geography in the world. The reason we ended up picking scope 3, and especially in context of India, is over 90 to 95% of the emissions for any company is in its scope 3. And large majority of those emissions are in their supply chain. There is no, your net zero goals have to take your scope 3 into account. Also, most of that scope 3, most of those supply chain emissions in India sit with MSMEs. Okay? MSMEs are not going to start moving towards net zero unless there's an economic reason for doing it. Right? And large organizations now, with the mandate from SEBI, with the mandates coming from RBI and other places, are starting to move in the direction of getting to net zero, will put the requisite policies in place, incentives in place for their supply chains to start moving towards net zero. And hence, the focus scope 3, so that the transition is not just limited to your own scope 1, scope 2, limited to the top 1,000 companies in India, but it flows down to all of their supply chains and all the parts that they touch. But you're right? It is a very complex problem, right? And the way we've gone about solving it is in phases, right? Like phase 1, where we are today, and we've just completed that, is how much of scope 3 can we accurately calculate just by using data that already exists in an organization. Right? And that's what we managed to do using absolutely proprietary technology, climate science models, etc., where what we do is essentially just take 2-3 types of data from an organization. We take their accounting data, their travel data, their logistics data, and facilities data, right? Just these 4 types of data. And we are able to do almost 99% of scope 3 emissions just by these data. The great thing in India is, because of GST, etc., is accounting data is very well structured, right? So you don't have to go and solve that sort of data problem for every organization separately. Once you've understood the taxonomy that works, you're able to take that and use your models and calculate emissions for an organization. But that's just the measurement part, right? Where honestly, a lot of our focus is now going is towards building what I call decision-making tools. Now, what we're doing in these decision-making tools is to help you understand the consequence of every decision you make in an organization, right? So if you're changing your product mix, your BOM mix, you're changing the location of your supplier, you're moving from supplier A to supplier B, you're changing packaging, what is the consequence on the sustainability of your product that you're manufacturing, or for that matter, any service that you do? So that's been our focus. It requires a lot of carbon accounting and climate science. So in fact, majority of our team are climate scientists. Most of them are spread across the world, because that talent pool in India is just getting created, and thanks to Anshuman for helping with that. Yeah, I mean, and we're a remote first company. We realize that this is a global problem. We'll need the best of minds globally to solve for it.
Sounds good, Ankit. And yes, we need to solve for it globally, because I guess climate is no more a local problem. It's the same air we all breathe. So that's true. Anshuman, caught you at the wrong hour of the night, but we will try to get you your thoughts on this. So broad education for climate space. I know it's a passionate project and you look through a lot of ideas. What is the key element which was missing, and what are some of the early proof points that you're already seeing, and how are you seeing more reception both at the business and consumer level, and what are some of the areas you're working on?
Yeah, so I think when we started out as an entrepreneur, for me, I wanted to have the shortest path to the solution. So if the idea was to get 100 million people working in climate, it seemed like that the answer might be just to create a marketplace. There must be lots of people interested. There'll be lots of companies who want to hire them, and stuff shall happen. Interestingly, at least 2 years ago, even in the US, and remember, we're talking about Trump era at that time, the real mojo was not on the company side as much as it was on the talent side. So we saw incredibly talented people raise their hands and say, I don't know where to begin, but I am going to jump into climate irregardless. So we said, okay, fine, let's build a solution for them first. which is to help them navigate, help them orient themselves in this space. But what I've seen change dramatically in the past 2 years, and to me, it's astonishing. I used to run a political nonprofit in India for many years, actually. So I've seen how slowly politics changes until it suddenly does. And I think that's exactly what happened in the past 2 to 4 years in the US. So what we see now is there's incredible, to me, it feels like we're at this perfect storm on the individual side, where the politics is in place, where the capital is in place, where there's deep consumer interest. It's part of the zeitgeist now. And that's happening in the US and Europe. But globally, including India, one of the things that I'm seeing on the B2B side, and the business side, which is completely different, is that, first of all, 70 to 80% of all the carbon emissions in the world are now under some kind of net zero commitments stretching out all the way into 2070 in India's case, which is also translated into corporations. So, for example, in the US, S&P 500, I think about 30% of all companies are already on some 2040 or max 2050 net zero commitment targets already. Now, the cycle that I have seen, and I think Ankit might attest to that, is, and I hope that a lot of people here at PCCI kind of relate to that, is that there is almost like this step 1, step 2, step 3 in a corporation as they go through their sustainability journey. So step 1 is very aspirational. A CEO or a board will go out and make a public commitment for the company to hit some really impressive sustainability targets. And as soon as they come back, there is a oh no, oh shit kind of a moment when they come back and say, okay, for the first step we need to do is to first even start measuring what kind of emissions that we have. And that's why you need someone like what Step Change is trying to do in very importantly. And that's why you're seeing a lot of action, investments, dollars, unicorns, etc., happening in that first stage, which is measuring all kinds of resource footprints that these companies have. But as soon as you've started measuring it and reporting it to the markets, your next step is to start showing some downward trend, some improvement. And those improvements are not easy in most cases. So therefore, the very first port of call for that is for companies to often go to offsets and start buying some offsets for the work that they're doing so that they can start reporting better numbers from the next quarter. And that's why you're again seeing this massive industry completely putting up from essentially scratch, which is focused on the entire value chain of creating offsets, validating them, auditing them, et cetera, et cetera. But then the third part, and this is the one which is really the tough one, but frankly, the long-term solution is to do a business transformation. You have to change the way you do business right now to be able to hit those targets that all these corporations have set out. And that's where I think something like Terra plays a role, which is you need to upscale, you need to train all your employees, starting from the board, all the way down to frontline employees on why sustainability is a key business driver for you, not just a CSR thing that you have to proclaim. And that requires training supply chain people in understanding what sustainable supply chains look like, training IT people in understanding how technology procurement should happen and technology deployment should happen, and so on and across every single part of the corporation. So that skilling is frankly not just a program. It's not like you send people to some workshop or some 12-week program like the ones that Terra runs. It's actually it's a mindset shift. And that mindset shift is something that happens over, there might be an intense period of activity to begin with, but then it happens over a period of many, many quarters through continuous learning that happens inside the corporation. And frankly, there's nothing for that out there right now. In fact, one of the interesting things is that I heard Accenture's CEO, Julie Sweet, talk about how sustainability is a new digital. Anjali talked about that also. And there's a very good reason, because the transformation that we're talking about is essentially a third of the world's GDP transforming itself very, very quickly. And all of the opportunities that come along with that to be a market leader against all your competitors, to have a brand that stands for sustainability, is waking up all corporations to the fact that this is where the pot at the end of the rainbow is. So I'm very excited about what's happening inside corporations and how they're transforming themselves and how training and upskilling will play a role there.
Thanks, Anshuman, for this call of action, creating an army to build for climate, and Anjali for everyone else is founder of Avana Capital. She's also immediate ex-president of Bombay Chamber. and we have had strong association with Bombay Chamber for a while now. My next question is to Hemant. Hemant, you are building for EV. I think EV is the next word which I hear almost once in a day, if not more. Everyone is talking about EV. What does India look like in 10 years? What are the other innovations happening, and how is Turno geared to sort of build that ecosystem while taking advantage of all the conversations around it?
Sure. No, I think it is definitely part of the mainstream conversation right now, because I think it's one of the most actionable, tangible things most of us can do, right? All of us use transportation on almost a daily basis. So it is at least easiest for people to kind of access and talk about. So I think, but I think it's good that now there's a mainstream dialogue about EV. Back when I said we in 7-8, we were trying to invest in electric vehicle companies. There were two companies. One survived and basically made us all talk about EV. Another kind of died. The other one is Fisker Automotive. No, I think, see, for us, I think there are two things when we kind of think through the EV point of view, right? While automobile technology basically perfected itself for what it's worth over now at this point 120 years, what we are expecting and demanding at this point in time, the quality that is demanding at this stage is equal amount of assets to be deployed on roads or even elsewhere at this stage in literally a decade, right? So the demand or the aspiration for everybody is that, hey, next 10 years we need to get to 60-70% EVs, at least as percentage of new sales. And that is not going to happen because some magic technologies come up, right? I think it is going to happen because fundamentally business models have to change very dramatically to be able to make already a reasonably understood technology at this point in time. People have gotten Nobel Prizes for this, right? And kind of delivering it to people at a more accessible price point and making it more accessible. I think the innovation is really not on the technology, at least from my point of view, at least when, like, you know, my co-founder Sudhir and I look at it. The demand of input here is not necessarily of technological innovation. It is really of business model innovation, right? And when I say business model innovation, taking a particular consumer behavior which is used to a certain cost structure and purchasing those assets in a certain way, and delivering an expensive asset with hopefully the same cost structure or lower cost structure, and making it accessible to more people, right? And that is why I think, like, people need to be able. That's why when I kind of mentioned that, hey, we need to have a separate DNA, you need to kind of start thinking through the problem in a more holistic, new balance sheet point of view as to what type of capital will come in, what type of products will be delivered, and who will we deliver it to. And while doing all of this, are we actually impacting the biggest needle movers in the ecosystem, right? So I think at least that is the way we kind of structured our business and business model around it. It is really about changing the structural costs that exist in the automotive industry. And this is not just eliminating dealers and just going and selling vehicles online, right? I mean, that is like whatever. I mean, it's not super meaningful additive at the end of the day. How do we get like better financing? How do we actually develop stronger asset valuations? How do we, I mean, like, for example, what we do, we take, we kind of, our core bet is that, hey, we'll be able to repurpose automotive batteries into other applications, right? So these are very non-homogeneous industries that need to trade with each other at some point in the future. If not, all of us are just sitting on piles of battery, which is completely like useless, and that's going to happen very fast at this point. I think that needs a very different type of investment, very different type of capital, different type of kind of profit management to get to that point in a sustainable way, right? So I think that is at least how we have designed for it. We believe if you really look at how India has adopted technology, because think about UPI, right? UPI was a fundamental destruction of entire intermediate and costs in financial services. India is always, if I really think about it, India and Indian business is really about how do you kind of do this technology distribution at a very mass scale, very rapidly. At least that is kind of a massive inspiration for us, that if we are able to do that and deliver these assets, which I think the previous speaker has mentioned, that hey, you cannot ask all customers to put extra capex, even though there are benefits of OpEx in the EV, nobody can afford it to begin with because the capex is so high. That's why we kind of had to solve for financing. That's why we kind of work on distribution with OEMs, and we also bring asset value, and that is kind of a core value that we add. I think if we are able to do things like that, and I think there are others also obviously trying different angles to attack this problem statement. We do feel like in 10 years, I don't think people will be talking about buying electric car or electric vehicle versus non-vehicle. There will only be one type of vehicles, and that will be clean energy vehicle. And everything else is kind of Maruti 800, right? Nobody talks about it. I think that is just the nature of the automotive industry. People talk about the new thing, and at that point, the only thing that will exist probably is going to be new energy vehicles. And I think we are reasonably confident. Like, for example, in the segment that we operate, this is the cargo segment. 30% of the people already buy electric vehicles, and we just started talking about electric vehicles in India like literally like 1.5 to 2 years ago. So I think very massive consumer shifts are happening that kind of we feel like to your point, getting to 50% probably is a reasonable bet at this stage. We don't believe it is a very insurmountable task just from what all things that we are seeing in the market.
Thanks, Hemant. Let's all work towards taking the pollution away from city center. Now I'm going to put all of you in a spot. One of the favorite things is before that, I think Inception. If you all have seen the movie Inception, it's very important to sort of plant an idea and let people think it's their own. And I see here an audience of about 137 odd people who are all climate passionate folks. And I would love to get the room to sort of brainstorm a few ideas that others could also be working in terms of solving for climate and using technology. So my question, and let's start with you, Abhay. If you were not building Geeky and if you had to solve for something else in climate, what else possibly could you be solving for? And that is something our audience could also think about if they're looking to build for climate technology.
Water.
Be more specific. Water is huge and water is very political and water is very hard.
So actually, I just recently, my professor who actually works in the material science department, she is also working in different water technologies. And I was discussing with her, and we kind of know that a certain kind of graphene oxide could actually refine or clean water again without using much of the electricity. And that might solve a lot of problems even in India and outside India. And I would say, as I mentioned before, water, land, and food are like very core to any civilization. So I would say, in fact, if things go well with Iki, and this is what Iki means. Iki is actually derived from Ikigai, the Japanese concept of reason to life or meaning to life. I would really want to focus on solving water, because we also use water a lot in our farming, and we are trying to figure out ways to clean water, remove toxics. In fact, toxicity in water in the West Bengal region is like one of the major concerns. So I would say using certain materials to clean water as soon as possible, that would be my focus area.
Thanks, Abhay. Lots of food and water for thought. Let's move on to you, Ankit. What would you be solving if not step change?
Yeah. Something I've always wanted to solve, and in fact tried to, is there's hundreds of millions of people who are passionate about climate in their personal life, right? They're not passionate enough to fundamentally change their life, right? They're not going to go live in a forest sustainably, give up everything, their job, etc. But they do care deeply about climate. But how do you take that conscious class of customers and help them understand how to live more sustainably, live with their values, invest more sustainably, buy the right type of things, right? And use that power of masses to really push them towards right behaviors, right products, get them to signal to organizations that they care about stuff like this, right? Like today, there is no platform that can sort of bring together such a mass of people to drive change. I think something like that would I think would be very impactful.
Thanks, Ankit. I would just add, get people to consume less, hopefully, over time. Over to you, Hemant.
I thought you were going to go to Anshuman first.
Let's go with you.
Yeah. No, I think I would have, in fact, I would consider this very seriously. I would have given discount coupons to people to buy more sustainable products and then go on and try to monetize that from companies. I think big contributor ultimately is consumerism, right? How we all consume and they make daily choices. Yeah, literally just gone and discounted everybody's consumption patterns.
I totally agree. I would love to partner with you on that. Over to you, Anshuman.
This might still happen within Terra itself, but my theory of change about India specifically in terms of climate action is that we haven't yet told the story of why it matters and how to get there. We're still stuck in the world of either Western influenced versions of what climate solutions are, which are very sometimes carbon centric, and we haven't really connected them to the realities of life here. So my pet dream has been to try to set up a climate journalism program for India. The theory and journalists there would not be the Times of India journalists alone. It would be the TikTokers and the IIT Kanpur professors who are doing a ton of research on air quality and teaching them how to take what they know and broadcast it out in this integrated India-centric, global South-centric view of how climate gets solved. And to me, what used to be a perennial source of frustration back in the day is now an inspiration, which was that every time I would talk about climate in India, people would say, oh, you mean air pollution? Oh, you mean plastics? Oh, you mean water? And I was like, no, I mean climate. And it took me a few months to get to the point where I realized that, look, maybe they have the story right, which is we are living in this highly integrated, connected world, which has all of these challenges which manifested themselves as the climate crisis that we are in right now. So who's telling that story? I would love to create a climate journalism school or something like that that'll allow that to happen.
Thought leadership, definitely. I think the narrative definitely needs to move beyond mitigation to adaptation, resilience, to India reality, grand reality. And I think all of us will love to partner with you on that whenever we get there. Sandeep, I know we are at the top of the hour. So let us know.
Yeah. So thank you, Swapna, for a wonderful session. I think there's great learning here, and we would love to call all these experts back someday. So thank you, Anshuman. Thank you, Abhay. Thank you, Ankit and Hemant, for a wonderful session. We have some questions, but what I'll do is, due to the shortage of time, I'll post it to y'all, and then as soon as you'll reply back, we will have these again. Or you could reply, I think I saw Ankit replying to one of the questions, so you could still do that online before you get off the session. So thank you once again. And with that, I would move on to our fireside chat. Today, we are very happy to have with us Sachin Jain, Head of Clean Energy India at Boston Consulting Group. And this session would be moderated by the head of our Sustainability Committee at Bombay Chamber, Mr. Anirban Ghosh. Anirban, over to you and Sachin.
Thank you, Sandeep. I'm waiting to see Sachin on screen. And Sandeep, how much time do we have? What time should we close this conversation?
So Anirban, we have around 25 minutes.
Okay, wonderful. So at about 4:30 is when we close.
Yes.
Sachin, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time and for all the wisdom that you're about to share with us right now.
Yes.
You're welcome. Sachin, during the course of the previous conversations, my network threw me out twice. So I'm going to adopt one mitigation method and share with you 3 things that I would love you to speak about In the eventuality I get thrown out, you know what you have to talk about, okay?
Sure.
So first, I would want you to look into your crystal ball and tell us what you see about the progress of clean energy in India. How do you see it accelerating? What do you see enabling the acceleration? Do you see acceleration at all? Whatever else your crystal ball tells you. The second thing I want you to talk to us about is it economically feasible for an energy company today, whether it is a thermal power company or a fossil fuel company, is it economically feasible to completely transition to renewable energy? Much like Engie has done or Ørsted has done, is a similar thing possible in India? And if you could help us understand the situation today. And lastly, if you had a small set of arrows, I'm not saying one, maybe 2 or 3 things that you would want done to, suddenly give the sector a massive push upwards, which everyone says is going to happen, what would those 2-3 arrows be? So these are the things I want you to talk about. Could you please start with your crystal ball?
Thanks, Anirban, and thanks, Bombay Chambers, for giving me this opportunity. I will try to address those queries. Let me start with the first query, in terms of clean energy and what I see currently. So in terms, if we look at India market, we are, doing annually, like last year we did like 13.5 gigawatt. And this is kind of an installation just in India. But if I look at globally, right, and in global markets, it was expected that in 2022, the entire capacity of solar, for example, would end at 220 gigawatt. However, the numbers which are coming out right now, we are in the last month right now of the year in December, and the numbers are coming out is like close to 260 to 270 gigawatt from 220 gigawatt, which was expected, right? And this is where the entire momentum we are seeing, not just in India, but in globally, across various parts of the world. And the entire renewable adoption, what we are seeing is growing maybe 15 to 25% in different parts of the different countries. And this is driven by various things, right? I mean, one is definitely the cost of the renewable power is going down. Second, what we discussed in earlier sessions as well, like, importance of getting net zero targets, plus at the same time, a lot of companies doing climate pledge, right? So there is a lot of push from the end consumer as well, where they're looking at adopting renewable energy. Now, in terms of, if I look at, this is a global scenario, and I talked about the Indian scenario, right? Now, in terms of India, right, we are close to 60 gigawatt of solar, and we are, in terms of wind, we are close to 41 gigawatt. Going forward, if we look at the India's target, right, what we have for 2030, and we have to reach a 500 gigawatt target, where both wind and solar, if we need to add annually, like if I just look at solar, in the next 8 to 9 years, we have to add like 28 gigawatt every year. And similarly for wind also, we need to add like another 10 gigawatt or so every year to meet our targets. Now, in terms of investments, right, what does it mean? So when I talk about 28 or 30, like gigawatt of solar, right, and plus wind, we are talking about close to $30 billion of kind of annual investments in India, and in particularly just in wind and solar, right? This is kind of investments what we are looking forward to. Back up with this, right, in terms of what we are seeing on ground, in terms of the numbers, right? So yes, I mean, the scale is large, right, which we are seeing that the scale is large, right? And this is where a lot of global investors are looking at coming to India. We are seeing now a lot of large, like there is global pension funds, sovereign funds, there is infrastructure PE funds who are coming in. A lot of strategics are also looking at the Indian market. India, in terms of globally, is like the third largest market, right? After China and US, India has become like the largest, third largest in solar, and there is significant amount of capital. So when I think from an investor point of view, what is driving me to come to India? So of course, scale is there, right? We see this, there's a huge amount of scale, right? But at the same time, they have an assurance that the projects, the capital which they are deploying will get properly invested. And there is assurance for that. So India has got that credibility in the global market now, that so much of capital is coming in, right? So that's the, in terms of the scale and how the investors are seeing what is driving it, right? Now, considering all this, right, and if I see the ground level action, I mean, this is the best time to be in the industry. It's like just the last 1 or 2 years, there is close to now 50 to 60 gigawatt of domestic manufacturing announcements done by various companies. This we have not seen earlier. And this is where 50 to 60 gigawatt of capacity, if I see in next couple of years coming down in India on ground, I mean, this is an amazing area where so much of capacity is getting built, and this will create tremendous amount of jobs also in India. So in terms of action, yes, I mean, the manufacturing and a lot of companies are showing interest. But on top of that, we also have a lot of government support, where initially we had the PLI 1 scheme, and now PLI 2 scheme is there, which is going on right now, which is close to 19,500 crore of PLI incentives being offered to the manufacturing industry. So this is where there is a lot of support, and where the companies are looking at, in terms of the renewable energy adoption. Now, if I take this was a macro view, what is happening, right? But if I see on the other side, right, now what is the end consumer thinking about this, right? So when I see end consumer, like there are companies, now they're thinking that, okay, shall I, like they are taking various targets, right? Like in the earlier panel we discussed, like the companies are putting, they are taking net zero targets. Somebody's taking 2030 target, 2035, 2040. I mean, there are various targets are happening. Companies are moving towards RE100. Some of them are also looking at like climate pledge. And at the same time, they're also realizing that the renewable power is much cheaper. So earlier, the adoption which was happening, if I see 4 or 5 years back, a lot of adoption which the corporates were doing, which was largely in rooftops. And from rooftops, it started moving down to ground mount utility scale projects. It started with solar projects, then it started with wind, and now there are hybrid projects. So when I see from an end consumer, they are seeing that can I replace maximum power with renewables, right? And how can I really do that? Earlier, just a pure solar solution will give me a CUF of maybe say 25, 27% CUF. And when I add wind to it, I was looking at like a additional total CUF of 50 to 60% replacement. So this is where a lot of corporates were looking at it. Now, I mean, the solutions are also changing in the market. Along with wind and solar, with hybrid solution, now companies are looking at round the clock solution, right? And then round the clock, can I give renewable power? And this is where also Dr. Mathur earlier touched upon, right? Can we really serve renewable 24/7 power? So a lot of new solutions are coming in, where there is also a merchant market, where in the merchant market right now, you can actually have renewable energy traded, buy and sell towards that. And companies can look at those options. And some of the places, what I'm seeing is like there is, with wind and solar, if you combine with merchant power, you can actually increase your replacement. So for the companies who are now looking at replacing 100% of their power, from 60 to 70%, they can further increase with the merchant kind of entire profile which they can have. Along with this, storage is another aspect where pumped hydro storage is being worked out in the market, which eventually can further increase. And how do we reach towards this 100%, right? But of course, from a corporate perspective, 100% is not always easily doable, right? And that's why there is IREX, and there are right now green tariffs being offered by some of the states. At the same time, there is a virtual PPA where a lot of global MNCs are also trying to do virtual PPA, where they buy the carbon offsets out of that, right? So when I think from a end consumer perspective, it's definitely in their mind that, like, how do I really reach this 100% goal, right, of renewable energy? This is where some of the aspects, in terms of how the renewable energy market is growing and in terms of shaping up, right? And I will say the exuberance is can be seen on ground, whether if I see the actual number of developers or investors, or from the end consumer perspective. I mean, there is a huge amount of interest on ground for it. And the last 2 years have been really great. I mean, in terms of post-COVID, the Indian markets have really bounced back very well. And if I just see the last 9 months, I mean, India has done more than 10 gigawatt or so of installations, right? I mean, that gives a kind of confidence that in spite of COVID, in spite of the global economy, the on-ground progress in India is doing quite well.
So two big messages from what you said, Sachin, that for the first time, the industry is growing faster than it is expected to. At least that's what the numbers are showing. And that a lot of options are now available for people who want to adopt renewable energy. These are very clear from the examples that you gave. Can you help us pivot to a conversation we don't normally have, which is, let's say there is a thermal power company. We all know that thermal power will not continue forever. So obviously we need a situation where, as an energy company, this thermal power company has to be profitable, maintain its EBITDA, maintain its market cap, or grow it if it were to become a renewable energy company. Is that a possibility today, or is it too early, or can we expect it to happen, or are we barking up the wrong tree?
Yeah, no, it's a very valid question, and actually, I mean, it's being very actively being discussed across various energy companies. I mean, whether it is thermal or oil and gas companies, and currently is the right time what they're thinking through. So what I was just mentioning earlier, right? It was largely, companies were thinking from a scope 2 perspective, right? And when I say in terms of scope 2, it was basically moving my electricity to renewables. Now, most of these companies also, like if they look at reducing their scope 1, which is now, becoming very difficult, right? How much kind of efficiencies they can bring in their current operations. And if they see in the next 10 years or 15 years, most of the companies are thinking that to build a renewable business so that large chunk of their revenues can come from the renewable side. And that's how they can, even look at reducing their scope 3 and, eventually grow their entire business and reduce their overall carbon footprint, right? So from an overall larger scale perspective, a lot of companies are definitely thinking that how can I, really move from the current set of, businesses to a renewable businesses. And this is a natural shift we are seeing, which is eventually happening, where if you see, even if you compare a lot of the thermal plants and, in terms of the current LCOE level, renewables are very, very competitive. Now, in terms of when such companies start thinking about renewable as a business, right? So there are 2 or 3 things, right now they have to consider and they look at it, right? Now, in terms of what kind of returns do I get out of this business? Is this business making sense for me, or is my current business making more profit, right? So in terms of renewables, a lot of the large utility scale projects, which are getting bidded out in auctions, what we see, the range is quite wide depending on each company's kind of cost of capital and in terms of scale, what they have. But on an average, what we are seeing is range from 12% equity returns to maybe a 16% equity returns, right? And that's a very broader range depending on what scale and size and technology are we using. But I mean, this is what is the broader range. And when a company thinks about it, for some companies, this returns may not be attractive enough. And for some, this can be attractive. But I mean, if I see from a renewable perspective, a lot of companies also see that this is like a stable business where the returns are quite assured. And these are assured for the next 25 to 30 years. And where the kind of, it's not like every year you're trying to grow the business, right? Once you put up the capital and the assured returns are there for that. And that's why we see a lot of this pension funds, right? And a lot of the sovereign funds, right? They need an asset class which is more and more secured, more like real estate, and is trying to give kind of assets secured returns for so many years down the road, right? And that's why they're okay with the lower set of returns. And that's when most of these companies, when they start thinking about getting into the renewable business, right? And they're thinking about moving their scope 3 emissions, reducing that, and how can I get into different kind of businesses? Renewables becomes one of their core strategies because it's a kind of assured, right? It's not like some of the technologies where I had to invest and then I had to worry whether I will really make money or not out of that. So it's assured and the returns are there, and you pretty much know where you will end up, once you know your capex and your cost of capital. So your capital is actually deployed much later and you know where you are heading towards it. But I mean, if I do all this math, right, and if I'm thinking as a company, if I'm a large oil and gas company or if I'm a large energy company, right? So where do I get this capital from, right? So say if I have a target, right, okay, let me do a 5 gigawatt by 2030, or say 10 gigawatt of it, right? And I mentioned like close to $1 billion is kind of a 1 gigawatt. So it's a huge capital inflow, which is going to be required for companies to meet this kind of obligations which they are planning to do. And the question in front of them at this stage is that how do I really make this capital happen? Can I get this capital from my free cash flow? Or can I get it from an external investor? Or can I get it from some kind of a joint ventures, right? So this is a lot of questions in a lot of boards right now, where of course the ambitions are there and the targets are getting set, but at the same time, how do I really leverage the capital in the best way, right? So that actually I can create this business out of it, and that can be a good kind of a parallel for their current business, because if they see 10 year or 15 year down the road, and many of them, they know, like, as we are moving from pretty much to EV kind of industry, and at the same time coal to renewables, right? A lot of them, they know that there's a large shift is going to happen. So how do they prepare themselves? And one of the key things is, of course, the capital. Another aspect, just want to leave it with a very light thought on that, is capabilities, right? Because they have been used to run this business in their own, whether it's a thermal plants or oil and gas setup. And in renewables, the capabilities required are somewhat different. So how do we really build those capabilities within the team, and eventually the markets can grow? But just to assure them, and just to put out the last thought on this point, is though I may say that, okay, wind and solar total maybe in India is close to 101 gigawatt or so, right? But if I see not 2030, but if I see 2040 targets, and which a lot of like from the global, like the IEA reports and globally what we can see, we are looking at a range of close to 800 gigawatt to 1200 gigawatt of wind and solar getting added totally by 2040, right? So even if some companies, may be a late entrant into this, still the market is quite big enough out there, right? I mean, to capture, right? So that's the thought on, basically your question on a transition and the business shift, right? I can go on the third point which you mentioned, or if you have query.
We are in the end overs, and
Sure.
let me weave in a question that's come.
Sure.
So first thing is this whole conversation every time we discuss renewable energy is how the distribution companies don't have money, and how if the paying customers go away, then the whole system will get disrupted. Sometimes I think we are held hostage by the current industry structure and the current industry dynamics. A question that came in was, these panels after some time will create a lot of waste. The question also included the fact that batteries will cause a lot of waste in the future. So maybe this is not a great solution. These are two things that people talk about as barriers in this industry all the time. I'm sure you know of other barriers as well. So if you had the opportunity, what are the one or two levers that you would want to pull to make sure that the industry transition happens reasonably smoothly and is not unnecessarily blocked by various things that are there in the ecosystem today?
Got it. No, that's a very valid questions and valid concerns, right? And so I will say that one or two things which I see that which is important, and as India is growing, right? Like I said, there is significant amount of interest from the global capital. That also means that a lot of the levers or the engine what India is having is pretty good, right? And that's why so much of capital is getting attracted. However, the point which I mentioned earlier, that if I think from an end consumer point of view, right, I am not happy at 25 or 50% of renewable power. If I just do wind and solar, right, because sun, like the solar generates during the daytime and the wind during the nighttime, and different seasons, right? So I can't really replace my entire power. So how can I really go towards 100% renewable solutions and having an RTC power? And one of the few things, right, what we require right now, which we are seeing in a lot of global markets, is the emergence of the merchant market. And merchant market is quite new in India. I mean, it's right now it's growing. We do still see like monthly there is close to 400 or 450 million units getting traded. However, this market where we can have a contracted capacities for merchant power, we will require some amount of learning and some amount of pilots, and there will be some support required in terms of financing. And this is where I see that, in terms of we build the merchant market so that if I think from a end customer perspective, we are moving towards 24/7 renewable power. And that's where the entire industry and overall the growth can happen.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Either you or one of your colleagues, I'm sure, will be trying to solve the DISCOM problem that we have in our country today. We did very well on time, and thank you for addressing the questions in the comprehensive manner that you did. Look forward to more conversations with you on the subject and wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Yes.
Thank you, Sachin, for a wonderful session. And thank you, Anirban, for moderating this session. With that, we move on to the next panel. And the panel is on financing the transition. I would like to welcome our moderator, Apurva Mitra, Associate Partner, KPMG. And along with Apurva, I would like to also welcome Dibrit Sen, Managing Director, Head of Global Banking, North India, HSBC. Praveen Vasist, Chairman, Howden, India, also member of Bombay Chambers Board. Sarojit Iyer, Vice President, Sustainable Finance and Climate Change, Octus ESG, and Manish Dabraka, PMD and CEO, Enking International. So thank you all of you for sparing time and being with us today. Over to you, Apurva.
Thank you, Mr. Khosla. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yeah, yes.
Or otherwise, I can put on my headphones if that's better.
It is slightly muted, so.
Am I audible better now? Is it
Yeah,
better?
much better.
Much better.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Khosla, and thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. We have an eminent set of panelists like Mr. Khosla introduced, so I'm very excited to speak to everyone today. And what I'll do is I'll probably start with like a brief context setting for our discussions today. We know that according to very recent estimates from the Standing Committee on Finance, we need funding of between $6 trillion to $11 trillion until 2030 to achieve the kind of climate goals that developing countries have set for themselves and have outlined within their climate commitments. And while this, ask is in trillions, the goal that developing countries or developed countries had committed to in 2009 was to mobilize 100 billion in climate finance annually. And while this might seem like a very small number in comparison to the ask today, which is in trillions, countries have actually failed to even meet these targets year on year. Which is why, finance was actually on top of the agenda at the Conference of Parties this time at Egypt. And I was there and listening in on many of these conversations, and it was interesting to hear several sides of the story. But India's specific stance here was that climate finance should be, long-term, it should be concessional, it should be climate-specific. There should be equitable allocation between adaptation and mitigation projects as well. And even if all of these are very important as qualifiers, but at the same time, we understand it's very challenging to secure this kind of finance. Long-term financing has always been a challenge within developing countries. And securing finance for adaptation has also always been a very big challenge. And while, such climate investments, typically within the energy sector as well, in emerging and developing economies have been dependent on public sources of finance, we now have a shared understanding of the fact that majority of the clean investments in the future would need to be privately financed, with public sources perhaps playing a greater sort of enabling role, which can help multiply or scale up private finance. But a lot of heavy lifting might actually have to be done through private finance. So against this backdrop, my first question would be to Mr. Dibrit Sen. Mr. Sen, given your experience in the sustainable finance space for so long, what do you think has worked so far? And what can we do to further bridge the finance gap that that is so evident today? Are there ways in which financial institutions, including central banks, commercial banks, institutional investors, what are the ways in which they can work together with the government and private sector to bridge the finance gap faster?
Thank you, Apurva. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for having HSBC as part of this panel discussion. We are very excited to be here. To address your question, Apurva, I think it starts from a basic change in mindset. I think Sachin was mentioning this in the talk just prior to this panel. At a broad level, if I look from a purely financing institution perspective, and the larger part of that are banks, it starts with a change in mindset in terms of looking at it purely from a risk point of view, because when banks get attuned to risk, they start acting because they are in the business of managing that risk. So I think the emergence of climate risk and its impact on your portfolio and overall portfolio risk quality is very significant. And that is something that understanding has to be more broad-based. Of course, the recent discussion paper that the Reserve Bank of India has come out in terms of climate risk and sustainable finance has set the ball rolling. And we expect significant action to build up within the overall banking industry. But so far, the thinking has not been very homogeneous. It's been very heterogeneous, and various banks have been at various stages of evolution. But
once people start looking at climate change as a risk and how it impacts their portfolio, do they then start thinking about how to manage this risk? And therefore, the concept of transition risk management becomes very important. And when transition risk management becomes very important, you then have no other option but to take actions which eventually end up in sustainable finance. But you look at your overall portfolio and the risks that climate change entails, and therefore you try to reposition the portfolio and see how much capital you need to provide where, or how much capital you need to pull back. And that in itself will set in motion the velocity of financing going in, and also the spread of financing going in. So as I said, the Reserve Bank of India's initiative in terms of this discussion paper has been very welcome. What we also think will help this grow is a much larger investor and stakeholder activism, which is initially visible. Of course, in developed markets, we see that much more than in emerging markets. But in India, we need to see that much more. I think people need to start looking beyond a transaction lens to look at and appreciate these kind of things. People need to understand that mitigation and adaptation are two very, very important aspects. And so far, we have seen a lot of finance actually flowing into the mitigation, not so much in adaptation. However, to end, I think what we also need to see is at a policy level or at a central bank level, some amount of capital relief, because at the end of the day, if you are going to get prodded to get more into sustainable financing, and there are issues around that sector, you need some amount of capital relief to put additional amount of capital there. We also need to sort for the challenge of accessibility to long-term finance or refinance. And most importantly, the case for blended finance or credit traps are very important to enable. I think as we go through our discussions, we can get into some of these aspects more. But broadly, just to summarize, a change in mindset, appreciation of transition risk management, deciding a plan of how to channelize your capital, expectations of capital relief from the regulator, and availability of long-term refinance or credit traps.
Thank you so much. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned risk. We've been working with a lot of banks on climate risk within India, whether it's physical or transitional. And increasingly, banks are now delving deeper into their portfolio, right? And not just on their operations. But a big challenge in our experience has been data. Whether it's macroeconomic data that can feed into forecasts or the data that you need for, stress testing. There is a lacuna in terms of tools and databases needed to, enable this assessment to happen more accurately. So, I understand your point. I think it's very critical for us to be able to assess this, to understand how we will be able to mitigate it. But if you look at the finance landscape overall, the challenge that we have to acknowledge is that, climate finance supply flows today are concentrated in very select sectors, majorly focused on renewables, limited to very few geographies, whether it's lower income and middle income countries. They barely receive like 5% of the global flows. And even countries within Asia, if you look at, we house the majority of the population, maybe like more than 60% of the population, but we barely get like 1/4 of the finance flows. And perhaps we're even relying on limited sources and instruments, and that's possibly a factor that's playing into this disparity. So with this, I'll turn to Mr. Surajit Iyer to maybe ask, in terms of your experience, how can we deepen, climate finance sources and instruments? How do we scale them up? How do we make them more broad-based? And essentially, how do we channelize them more efficiently to geographies and sectors where the need is critical today?
Thanks, Apurva. So Optus ESG is an advisory company working with financial institutions across emerging markets in sustainable finance, ESG, and climate risk management. So I'll be speaking from that lens, basis the experiences of some of the projects that we worked on in climate risk, blended finance, and so on. In response to your question, see, I mean, if one looks at the sources of climate finance or green finance that is out there, now, essentially, one roadblock that we reach, and this is, I believe, a point that Sachin was also mentioning previously, the question of patient capital. So, in most countries like ours, banking sector AUM is the largest share of AUM in the BFSI space, and then and most of it is of a tenor that may not really match with that of SDG related financing. So there is a need to incentivize or bring into the market the more long-term sources of patient and capital or patient capital, whatever you call them. Now, this could be done in various ways. How can we, and the question here really comes, we're talking about financialization of savings in India over the last few years. How can you mobilize a lot of that retail money into, let's say, green finance products, just like it moved into infra bonds some time back? How do you allow the money from philanthropic or foundations, endowments? And a lot of these philanthropic money are also coming up domestically in India now, because as HNI wealth grows, etc. So that money, I mean, the entire non-profit sector has already faced a lot of challenges. So now we need those conducive policies, clarity in regulations, and in continuity of what Dibrat was also saying previously, this policy has to go hand in hand with how you you develop the new products and how basically you create those change in mindsets. So that policy environment, policy change at the right time, especially to create the buy-in from the top in financial institutions to look at sustainable finance, that's really important. Incentivizing private sector investments further. We anyway have a problem in India where the capex, I mean, the general investment cycle has been low despite capex capital utilization being near full capacity. So now, how do you actually spur that investment cycle through from the private sector, especially into areas of climate action? Public capital, how do we use it more in terms of de-risking mechanisms or in terms of mechanisms that reduce the aggregate cost of capital? That is where really public sector could play an enabling role. So these are some of the aspects regarding the sources of finance if we look at it. We also need to remember a significant challenge to scale this place up, because this place has been dominated by large ticket issuances by large-sized issuers. And a lot of the climate needs, especially on the adaptation resilience side, community level projects especially, you'll be surprised, they don't need the billions, they need millions, sometimes even thousands. But the financing sources that are out there do not cater to those smaller ticket things. We faced this challenge ourselves when in Zimbabwe, when we worked on what was the one of its first kind blended finance structures in that market. So the sources of financing and the financing that is going out, the quantum of financing has to actually match with what the reality of that ground level realities of that market is, and basically put that into very clever structuring of financial products. That's how you create financing towards sectors that were unconventional. And had it been conventional, your normal vanilla products would have been more than sufficient. So it all also depends on clever structuring in energy or in other sectors. How do you actually combine the financing with the broader outcomes, let's say energy access or other sorts of food security, etc.? How do you combine those outcomes? When you combine those outcomes, that's when you are able to also get the buy-in from the broader set of stakeholders from across government, bureaucracy, policy, as well as the financial sector, the private sector, non-profits, etc. So it's a combination of efforts. If I'm to answer, to summarize in response to your question, it's a combination of efforts, both in terms of the sources and how that capital is actually converted or structured and put into the appropriate size or ticket size that really can be demanded, can be used in that geography.
Thank you, Mr. Iyer. I think these were great points and very important points. You talked about mobilizing finance, de-risking capital. I think that's a very important conversation today. And it was a very frequent conversation even at COP27 this time. How do we de-risk capital is perhaps even more critical for sectors that are hard to decarbonize, right? For many countries, what we require is transition finance, especially for developing countries. And by that, I mean financial support that can help some of these carbon intensive or hard to abate sectors like cement, steel, chemicals, refineries. How can it help them undertake decarbonization that is in line with the pace that science demands, right? And this is especially critical because, achieving reductions in these sectors is technically very challenging. What you typically require is large scale investments. You need structural changes within the sector. So if, for example, if you're talking about technology in our conversation, in our event today, novel technologies like green hydrogen are very important from the perspective of decarbonizing these hard to abate sectors. but they are longer term bets because they're yet to achieve commercial viability, but they're very important from the transition perspective. And since we're talking about innovative financial mechanisms that can fund the transition, I'll maybe now turn to Mr. Manish Tapkara, who's he has such a long-standing experience with the carbon markets, and we know that the voluntary carbon markets are one such instrument or mechanism that has sort of really picked up speed in the last couple of years after having witnessed quite a long period of slump. I started my career with the carbon markets, and there was one point we knew that it had been written off. But given the demand that we can see in the market today, the rising trading volumes as well as the price increase, what in your view is the potential for the carbon markets or offset space to provide that necessary financial impetus to kind of speed up the transition towards net zero? And if we specifically talk about transition finance for hard to abate sectors, what is the appetite in the market today to finance these offset projects that are located within industry compared to, say, renewables or nature-based solutions, which typically fetches higher prices for the project proponents? And perhaps, if you can talk about what is the forecast in terms of applicability of futuristic technologies like hydrogen for the hard to decarbonize sectors?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I have a few slides to share related to the basics of the carbon markets and some data I do have related to the achievements that had been done by the carbon market during last 15 years. And then finally, what the private sector is expecting from the carbon market. So just a minute, I will share you my slide. Can you see? Yeah, is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I'm from Enking International. We are one of the world's largest carbon credit project developer based in India. So as we all know, carbon credits are of two types. One is avoidance-based carbon credits and one is absorption-based carbon credits. And if we do any business activity which helps us to either avoid or absorb any of the 7 greenhouse gas like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, HFC, PFC, SF6, NF3, then we are eligible to earn one carbon credit. It's an environmental commodity which is traded globally. And it is considered to be the biggest commodity sector to grow in this century, as we know, the recent study that had been done by UNEP, which mentions to meet net zero goals, all nations do require cumulatively around 52 to 58 billion tons of CO2 emission reduction, and it is being anticipated with the help of national determined contributions, which India has also declared. And recently during August 22, we had updated the first NDC, which we have submitted during 2015-16, with the new, more ambitious targets. So it is being anticipated around 60-70% target would be met by all the nations through their NDCs, and then the remaining around 10 to 15 billion per tons per annum carbon credit would be required, and that will go in the slow momentum, because developed nations, specifically if you see European Union or maybe South Korea, they are highly ambitious and they do have emission trading schemes, while other developing nations and developed nations, they are in the process of having all this kind of emission trading schemes. So this 10 to 15 billion tons of CO2 or carbon credits would be required starting from 2030 or further years. These are the different types of carbon credits which are there in our industry, which comes from renewable energy, from household and community. Few our last speakers had mentioned about the same. Chemical industry, chemical or industrial sector, energy efficiency sector, waste management sector, agricultural sector, transportation, and ultimately nature-based solution activities, forestry and land use, which is quite aligned with the companies who are looking to become net zero, while all different credits can be used by the companies who are looking to become carbon neutral. So around 170 different types of carbon credit are used to be there in our industry, developed through various nations and various methodologies or technologies that do exist. The sellers, specifically, if we see in India, we would be having this much options in next 2 to 3 years timeline, like domestic emission trading scheme is going to happen in India, maybe from next calendar year. So we would be having compliance sector, we would be having voluntary sector. Thereafter, we would be having domestic voluntary sector, international voluntary sector. CORSIA, it is applicable to the airlines, is Article 6.2 sector and Article 6.4 sector. So this many sectors would be there for the generators, and the companies or the large emitters would then may not be the seller, but they may be the buyer for the credits originated from various different sectors that had been mentioned over the slide. We know all about 6.2, 6.4. This is the data which I want to show you. It will take just 5 minutes for me to complete all this specific slide. So CDM and VCS. So the registered projects across the world is around 4,000 projects are there. Issued credits are around from the international voluntary markets is around 1.3 billion tons of CO2 during last 15-16 years. This is the issuance starting from year 2002, issuance over the years in the voluntary carbon markets. This shows the issued credits. This shows the retired credits. That means the consumption of the credits over all these years. The non-retired volumes are getting accumulated, and slowly and slowly many companies are now looking to become carbon neutral or net zero. So it is being anticipated from year 2025, whatever the rates that do exist. Before 2021, they were less than 50 cents. After 2021, the high range is there, starting from $0.5 to $25. And then after 2025, it is being anticipated that it will grow very high, specifically the international voluntary markets. This is the non-retired volume. If you see the nature-based solution activities originated from Latin America or Indonesia, they do exist at the most, while the credits originated from India, like wind power project, solar power project, they do also contribute to this. And India is one of the largest supplier to voluntary carbon markets. Then United States is the second one, and then China is the third one in the present carbon market. This data is specifically related to CDM projects, which had existed from year 2005 to 2020, and around 2.5 billion carbon credits had got issued. So this is the overall summary. CDM credits were around 2.5 billion credits. Voluntary had supplied around 1.35. So around 4 billion credits had been supplied till date to the compliance market like UETS or to the international voluntary market. And every quarter the demand is increasing because various companies which do exist in developing and developed nations, they are looking to become net zero and carbon neutral. So this data already we have covered. So this is the last slide of mine, which is related to the expectations of the private sector, which is looking to mobilize climate finance in the form and format of the carbon credit. So the official statement from designated national authorities, including India, over no conflict over the voluntary carbon market, definitely will grow high interest of the investors and the buyers for this specific sector. Then the migration of the CDM projects to Article 6.4, more clarity if that will do come, then it will help sellers to position themselves to get the projects validations or verifications. Opportunity exploitation for Article 6.2, since India is the third largest emitter of the greenhouse gases in the present scenario, and we should look for getting more and more MOUs to be signed with other developing and developed nations to trade 6.2 credits and our so that we would be able to achieve our targets specifically at the country level or at the company level to achieve net zero goals from the economical procurement from other developing or developed nations. New eligible projects under Article 6.4 and support over identification and approvals within the different ministries is definitely is the required, very much a required thing from specifically from Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and Ministry of Power. Then the market size, which is very, very important from during year 2021, it was around $1 billion USD is the voluntary market size, voluntary carbon markets. The reports from Bloomberg and McKinsey mentions that by year 2030, only a major contribution from the voluntary market and the compliance market, which are going to start in various developing and developed nations, the market size will be around $15 billion, and by 2050 it would be around $500 billion, which will do cover majorly compliance market. So fund is there, which is available in abundance, while when the risk exposures will do get low, the carbon finance flow will be very, very high. So yeah, this is the last slide of mine.
I think thank you for that extensive background on the markets. I've always been wondering, with all that movement in the space and with countries coming up with markets of their own, I wonder whether the ecosystem is sort of getting more complicated for the private sector to wrap their heads around how the markets might pan out in the future. You mentioned so many different options for selling, and even at COP27, the various announcements that were made, whether it's the Energy Transition Accelerator or the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative that was launched at the COP. There are a number of markets being developed, even as we are still forming our, Article 6, latching down on the regulations and modalities and rules, the new mechanism that will essentially replace the CDM. And with cross-border, taxes being introduced, regulation being introduced, I think it may be making the ecosystem a little bit more complicated for the private sector to understand how the voluntary markets might function within these boundaries. Just coming back to my original question in that sense, how do you see the voluntary market panning out for perhaps the industry sector specifically? You talked about wind, solar, NBS, but for these particular hard-to-abate sectors, what is your forecast for maybe the foreseeable future?
So if you see in the present carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets, around 40% credits used to come from renewable energy and industrial sector. And industrial sector means energy efficiency. From year 2005 to 2020 or maybe 2022, the number of projects which came from the energy efficiency sector, because the first problem with the industries is the awareness. Whatever the investments that they are doing for installing energy efficient lighting or maybe boilers or furnaces or other different activities, which is helping to avoid carbon dioxide or methane emission or other industrial emission gases. If they will remain aware, then the number of projects will be more. The renewable energy project sector is quite aware about this specific thing. So out of this 40% renewable or energy sector contribution, only 5 to 10% is the number of credits that do come from energy efficiency sector out of that 40%. And the main problem is awareness with the industries that they are those projects which are helping to reduce emissions or avoid or absorb are eligible to get a credit, because in our industry we do have critical timelines or deadlines to apply for the registrations and verifications, and if we do miss, then definitely if the project is eligible, we would not be able to get it through. The second thing is energy efficiency projects are also complicated as compared to other sector, because we do have various different monitoring parameters. We do have various different needs within the organization or within the shop floor, and if we do not take advisory of the expert related to whatever the changes that we are going to do, or the flow of energy or flow of electrical energy or maybe steam or other different thing, then we need to get into the post-registration changes, and it will again create a lots of issues to get the issuances of the credit. So these are the two reasons because of which the number of credits that used to come into the voluntary carbon market from energy efficient sector is quite low. But while cautious planning within the industry or having the full awareness will do overcome these two barriers.
No, thanks for the statistics. I think I agree we've made a lot of progress, especially in renewables and energy efficiency, whether it's the carbon markets or whether as a country, I think we've made quite remarkable progress on renewables and energy efficiency specifically as a focus within industry. But we also understand that there's a limited extent of decarbonization that we can achieve using energy efficiency or RE, given the fact that most of the energy-related emissions, for example, within the industry sector, actually come from process heat or from process emissions, right, which are the harder to decarbonize sort of emissions. And maybe perhaps for those particular sectors where carbon capture and storage or hydrogen become very important technologies of the future for deep decarbonization, perhaps we then need more innovation in terms of instruments, for this purpose. So pushing forward with the same theme and sort of continuing to talk about innovative financial instruments, insurance was also under the spotlight this time at the COP27. While loss and damage, that you must have, this word now, is so frequently used with respect to the outcomes of the COP. This was introduced in the text for the first time. It found eventual acceptance. But what a lot of us don't know is that some of the developed countries, even before this was adopted, were actually pushing for insurance schemes instead to compensate for climate damages. In fact, Germany actually launched an insurance-based, global shield against climate risks effort, which looks at disbursing funds before or after disasters happen, via the use of various insurance instruments, whether it's at the household, business, or national level. So, for my next question, I'll turn to Mr. Praveen Vashisht. Given your long-standing experience with the insurance sector, as well as the risk management industry, what do you foresee as a role that insurance can play when it comes to the transition, or any other innovative financial mechanism you'd want to comment on? Whether it's from the mitigation, adaptation, or loss and damage perspective, where should we focus?
Thank you, Apurva. Am I audible?
Yes.
Sorry, I asked this question because I'm in a fancy place in Kerala, and I was repeatedly being thrown off the internet, and then I had to then rely on my iPhone, which is why I think my video apparently looks like a continuum of a mugshot in a police station. So apologies for that, because I'm dialing in through my mobile phone. Okay, so to cut to the chase, I think the insurance industry has a critical role to play in enabling the transition of the wider economy towards net zero and in mitigating the risk associated with climate change. So what have we done until now? So until recently, the industry has sought to address climate risk mitigation more on the asset side of the balance sheet. But clearly, we need to broaden our efforts and focus more energy and investments on innovating for climate transition risk mitigation across the core value chain. And I think in this context, product innovation really is going to be the key. And this is required through a number of areas. How we as an industry help and incentivize policyholders to decarbonize relevant assets and activities, how we underwrite to enable net zero business models, technologies, and lifestyles, and how we decarbonize the claims process itself. And accelerating insurance product innovation demands a more collaborative approach. Insurance companies, brokers, clients, risk managers, et al. So insurance and brokers have started collaborating with each other to deal with the Herculean task of achieving net zero goals. And there are several groupings, and two such notable groupings are Net Zero Insurance Alliance and ClimateWise. And my own company, Howden, for example, and we were present at COP27, is a member of ClimateWise. Now, let me give you some examples. There are a lot of priority areas. I'd say if I were to list, I'd come up with 8 to 10 priority areas. Let me just focus on a few. And since we were talking of the voluntary carbon offset, let me start with this space. So the insurance industry can contribute towards climate mitigation efforts and help support scaling the supply side of voluntary carbon markets for carbon offsets. And I know this is not a sales talk, nor the forum, but I'm happy to say that Howden has helped to pioneer the world's first carbon credit invalidation insurance product for the California Carbon Cap and Trade Scheme. So the product provides coverage against the risk of carbon credits being invalidated by regulators. So to date, we have wrapped around 24 million carbon credits. And the insurance policy not only covers the credits against invalidation, thereby securing their value, but it also increases the liquidity of the Californian market. A couple of other examples. AXA has been working to determine the feasibility of using insurance to cost effectively help restore mangrove forests after extreme weather events. Or Swiss Re's innovative natural capital solutions for coral reefs on the Yucatan Peninsula is quite talked about. Now, shifting focus from carbon offsets, let me come to enabling and incentivizing low carbon choices. So, demand for low carbon products is being widely met by insurance companies in personal insurance, not yet in commercial, though there's a significant demand in the commercial insurance space. So let me provide some examples. So Zurich Insurance, my ex-company, and a few others are providing low carbon choices to raise awareness of climate impacts and mitigation in the personal insurance space. So this includes, for example, providing carbon offsetting optionality for personal travel insurance and opportunities to select green initiatives to which company donations can be made in zero claim years. Another interesting example is RSA and a few others who are incentivizing customers to reduce their personal vehicle usage through motor insurance policy design and pricing for low mileage motorists, providing cheaper rates of insurance for those who use their cars infrequently. And we are beginning to see pay-as-you-drive kind of pricing mechanisms or initiatives coming up in India as well. The third area I'd like to pick up is reinstatement. Now, in simple terms, when we use the word reinstatement in insurance parlance, that means putting the customer or putting the insured in the same position as they were before a loss or a damage. So once again, Zurich, for example, has a green endorsement that covers the additional costs of reinstatement with products of building materials from sustainable material manufacturers. Similarly, for personal customers, RSA, another insurer, provides customers with the option to make greener choices by recommending energy efficient replacements of damaged goods following claims. Now, moving on, I think parametrics is an interesting area. And we have seen parametrics in play, even in India, when it comes to crop insurance, etc. So this type of a cover pays out when an event takes place based on a predefined range of parameters that are often measured by an index created for this purpose. So parametric solutions are rapidly gaining in recognition for their ability to model and respond to potential losses caused by climate change. They can be cheaper and faster than traditional insurance, as there is no need to assess damage before a claim can be paid. Insurers can also construct indices for addressing specific event types, enabling them to avoid potential climate risk protection gaps arising from a lack of data on past losses. I'll finally conclude with a couple of examples. So one is a case study of parametric coral reef insurance in Quintana Roo, Mexico. This is a coverage once again designed by Swiss Re, which uses a parametric structure. Payouts are triggered when wind speeds reach a predetermined index level. If this happens, funds are paid quickly for debris removal, initial repairs, and to repair the reef by planting new corals. My last example is on the solar side, because this is of interest in India. And this pertains to solar panel warranty insurance in the double trigger. So solar panel markets makers issue performance warranties on their panels. And these are contracts to pay the user of a solar panel, for example, a solar farm, in the event of non-performance of a panel, for example, faulty manufacturing, defects, or excessive aging. So Munich Re, one of the largest reinsurers in the world, has created a product that protects both parties to a solar panel performance warranty. So what does it do? As far as the panel maker is concerned, the panel maker is insured against the risk of making excessive payments under its performance warranties. As far as the farm is concerned, the farm is insured against the risk that the solar panel maker cannot pay under warranty because it is insolvent. So there are lots and lots of examples that I can continue giving, but I think I should stop there. The insurance industry has miles to go before we sleep. The last point perhaps I should make is about climate change itself. And in the last few years, and this is a favorite topic of mine really, we have seen increasing frequency as well as severity in terms of storms, floods, wildfires, and so on and so forth. And there's a huge amount of protection gap here. So what we mean by protection gap is the gap between economic losses and insured losses. So the insurance industry just about covers 1/3 of the economic losses. And in emerging markets, the figure drops down to 10% or even less. So there's a lot of work to do really, and it involves all stakeholders. I hope I have been able to address some of the issues.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Mr. Ashish. I think I absolutely agree with you on how important it is to sort of innovate on insurance products, and also that there is a lot to scale, to be able to expand on their coverage, whether it's commercial or personal. Of late, I've come across such interesting examples of the kinds of risks that are being insured today. Whether it's textile brands insuring their winter lines because winters are shorter, or, there are the several examples that you talked about. You talked about carbon credit and validation risks. These are truly like innovative products and models that, and this goes to show that we're truly thinking out of the box today within the insurance sector. And I've actually seen that, ESG teams within the insurance companies grow many folds in these last couple of years. That also goes to show that there is demand today. But having talked about, all these challenges and of risk today being a major driver, and hence, insurance also being a major product. The positive news is that although the scale of sustainable finance is still very, very small, but we're witnessing this sort of wave where investors are now taking ESG considerations seriously within, decision making in the last few years, whether it's driven by, risk factors or several others. But there is a considerable shift that's happening. So if you look at this entire last decade, right, sustainable investing has increased many folds in this time period. So there are a lot of positive signals. And maybe this could be a common question to all panelists, whoever would like to respond, but particularly Mr. Iyer, if you would like to. The question is, how do we scale this? How do we mainstream ESG more deeply within investment criteria? Especially in terms of operationalizing this, how are fund managers, for example, setting a line between what they consider, acceptable returns on investment, while they want to maintain like high quality ESG portfolios? What are some of the challenges? Is the lack of actionable ESG data a challenge? Does disclosure in that case need to be standardized, regulated more efficiently to enable this to happen? So broadly, what are the challenges? What should we do now?
Thanks, Apurva. Before talking on this question, one small point I wanted to add on the previous question you asked, and I think that was a very good question from the insurance side. In fact, the point, and I went back to a research report I had worked on for a clean tech focused NBFC once before my current role. That was on renewable energy insurance products and how those can be scaled up in India. Of course, a very nascent segment, but connecting it, and I think you said that point in your summarization as well, that a large part of innovation, fine, we have to do new product development, structuring, all that is fine. But you have a lot of nice products and mechanisms that have come up either in the foreign financial institutions or in very pilot scale at a very small scale, here and there. And the question is, how do you scale that up, firstly? And more importantly, how do you scale that up within the AUM of the Indian homebred financial institutions, because that's really where the bulk of the AUM resides. So in banking, for instance, 80% of AUM is in the domestics with the domestic banks, so PSU and private. So how do you make that transition? That's an innovation area that I would be very excited to look at. But anyway, coming back to this question, see on ESG oriented investing is increasing. Investors are looking at this more seriously, but there's a caveat here that I really want to stress, because that issue is also causing criticisms in what we call ESG oriented investing today. So, we were tracking quarter on quarter data of the 10 ESG oriented, ESG and climate oriented equity mutual funds that we have in India. And since the last 2 financial years, all of these are in the market. 7 came out with NFOs just after COVID. Now you will find that their aggregate AUM has actually remained stagnant at around $1.5 billion. The proportion to total equity has actually reduced. And that is contrary to the news headlines. You see that ESG investing is picking up, ESG investing is better. Now the question is, why is that? So we went down a step, we went into their investment methodology and philosophy, and we found that most of them are just looking at it as a top-down ESG score based on whatever disclosed data. And that score is just an additional layer over financial analysis. Now, the point is taking disclosure data by itself and just making a score like an additionality actually has very little to do with the inherent business being more sustainable. And that is why if you actually look into the data, the 2 funds out of these 10 who have performed the best in terms of ITD returns or last 2 years are actually the ones who have gone the contrary way of going bottom up, really analyzing the companies for the sustainability quotient and not just tracking Excel sheet templates of ESG data or data on ESG issues. So that's a fundamental point about ESG oriented investing that we need to understand, because that is actually something that is now becoming a limiting factor to scale this space up. So and just to take an example, we actually had an example where one of the ESG funds had a fossil fuel company in its portfolio just because it got a high rating because of some CSR activities, or inherent business being still fossil fuel led. So how do you go from here to investing that is more in terms of what we call sustainable investing, what the EU taxonomy or SFDR calls dark green in nature? How do you integrate sustainability considerations more holistically into the investment process? And that is where you see some of these theme-based funds or decarbonization-focused funds coming up. Now, those are the segments that really need to scale up, and that is the segment that those looking at sustainable investing, how it is scaling up, those are the type of funds that we need to look at, not ESG-oriented investing in general. When it comes to acceptable returns and ESG part of your question, so ultimately investing, someone once told me, long-term fundamental driven investing is really ESG investing. So there's nothing called ESG investing per se, because long-term fundamental driven investing presupposes that you have taken consideration of all the risk factors. And I think Dibrat was mentioning the same thing, that these are basically risks to the company or the financial institution. This is not something good to do, good to have, whatever. So if you look at the risks from a potential investee from a long-term perspective, then ESG, the risk related to ESG issues would fall part of it. And if that is not the case, then obviously what the asset manager is calling as a long-term investment strategy, it is incomplete or flawed. Now, that is something that as industry practitioners, we need to be wary of. Data part, of course, disclosures is there. Companies are coming out with glossy reports with fancy pictures. But then again, the idea of the disclosures is really to match it with active engagement for sustainable investing to really work. How do you engage actively through recommendations, setting of KPIs, tracking the progress of companies, measure the impact and so on, because application of the disclosure data into actual impact and practice through active engagement is what will drive sustainable change. And that will actually drive the results when it comes to sustainable investing. And that is when we will really have those news articles saying with evidence that yes, sustainable investing is far better than normal investing, whatever we call. So we need to see more traction on this, both on the FII, DIS side when it comes to Indian markets. Emerging markets are generally regarded with a very short-term outlook by foreign fund managers. That is the unfortunate reality. How do you now reorient those mindsets to look at really long-term holdings from a long-term nature? These are all the things that form part of this entire issue to answer your question, Apurva.
No, thank you. And I agree on all of those points. I think we definitely need to make these scoring or shortlist criteria more comprehensive in the way that companies are rated, to undertake more deep dives into a company's psyche versus just assessing what companies are doing for disclosure purposes. So looking at performance more holistically, I agree is what is needed. And I agree that that's also a very big challenge. And maybe one of the answers is developing a taxonomy for the country. But do you feel that perhaps when greater standardization happens, or when, for example, ISSB comes out with the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, which could standardize and maybe serve as a global baseline of sorts for capital markets, maybe some of these issues could be addressed?
Standardization would definitely help, because right now what we have is an overcrowded market where a lot of business opportunity in making sustainability reports and creating standards has, a lot of firms have jumped into that fray, and that's caused a lot of confusion. And see, ultimately all these things, and we did a major project with 10 large Indian banks on greening the Indian financial system on climate risk management. We know for a fact how difficult it is to get buy-in from financial institutions, Indian homebred financial institutions, as far as all these things are concerned. because there you need a buy-in from the top. Now the question is, if the managers are continuously going, okay, we need to make a GRI report, we need to make an IR report, now we need to make a BRSR, now we need to make a TCMD, the buy-in gets irritated. Now standardization from that perspective definitely is going to help. There's no doubt about that. It would lead to consolidation in the sustainability reporting market in terms of suppliers who provide these services, no doubt, and that's a churn we'll have to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree based on our experience as well. There's such a plethora of disclosure standards and frameworks that are applicable today that companies are focusing on doing more and more disclosure instead of perhaps more time could be spent on actually mainstreaming ESG within their operations. And I'm happy to check if other panelists would also like to respond to this question before moving to the next one. Okay. So maybe we can move to the next question. So I just wanted to ask also, given that we're talking about positive stories, we're talking about instruments. If we don't talk about the role of thematic or label bonds, I think something would be amiss, because in the recent past, we've seen that, thematic bonds such as green bonds or sustainability linked bonds have been soaring in popularity. We have been, as KPMG, we've been a leading assurance provider on that front from the country perspective. So we've witnessed that growth over time. Data from the Climate Bonds Initiative actually shows that we've crossed the $2 billion USD mark for cumulative green bond issuances already. But while this green bond market has been there for quite some time, almost a decade, sustainability linked bonds are actually a newer concept, and even this market is showing considerable, and steep growth. The government of India is also, as you all might know, has released a framework for issuing sovereign green bonds to tap these international funds. So my question again to all the panelists is, what are your learnings that you'd want to share from your thematic bond experience, especially for India, to build that necessary trust amongst investors? And what kind of support mechanisms are needed to grow the thematic bond market in India, whether it's green bonds or linked bonds? And Mr. Sen, maybe I'll push this towards you, given that you have managed some of the largest financing and debt capital raising efforts within the Indian market. So I wonder if you'd like to respond to that as well.
I think firstly, I'll start by saying that the initiative by the government to go ahead with the green bond is very, very welcome. I've been saying in various forums that a small country like Chile was far ahead in terms of issuance of such bonds in the peer group. Now, coming to your question, I think there are essentially four set of things that investors to these bonds look for. And in no order of priority, these are firstly the robustness of the green bond framework. Second, the detailed fleshing out of the eligible user proceeds. Third is the track record of the second party opinion provider. And fourth, most importantly, the governance and the reporting framework. So essentially, as long as any issuance is covering all these four aspects well, the issue should be a success. Now, coming to the progress made so far, I think the initial framework that the government of India has come up with has received a good response. There were investor calls that happened, and we have seen that investors received it pretty well in terms of how the government is going about it. The discussions were pretty transparent. Also, the second party opinion report will be from Cicero, who's got a good track record in this field. So everything looks pretty well. Now, one needs to understand that here the government of India is not talking about an offshore issuance, but a INR denominated issuance. And this will be part of the normal auction process of the government bonds. So from that aspect, it is likely that there will be more participation of domestic investors, but we do expect some amount of international investors to also come in. Coming to the second part of your question, overall, we have definitely seen that the Indian industry has gone up the curve in terms of their own sustainability journey. So we are seeing a lot more investor communication, and we are also seeing quite a number of labeled issuances in the sustainability linked or sustainability bonds or green bonds. Those kind of instruments are happening. Now, one distinguishing feature that I want to make is, as far as the demand side is concerned, there is a huge amount of demand from international investors. I think this is a theme time and again we are seeing in the last panel, we are seeing in this panel as well, that foreign investors, on account of the diktats they run or the clear allocation of funds which has to be employed into sustainable or green investing, they have a available pool of capital which is quite large. However, we don't see that happening in the domestic space, and therefore, if that were to happen, that would definitely make large amount and pool of capital available for the domestic issuances to be picked up pretty well. So while in the overseas issuances, I mean, ignoring the dislocation in the bond markets presently, when it was not, say, start of the year, we saw that the subscriptions were, the issuances were oversubscribed, the spreads were tightened quite a bit, and that was a function of the investor interest. But we could see that happening in the domestic market only if we have more pools of capital. Right now, we don't see that distinguishing feature happening within the domestic market.
Apurva, if I can quickly jump in and add a point. So, I mean, in continuity what Devrat was saying, by the way, Devrat, you'll be happy to know that one of our major projects that we've done has been with banks in Chile. And I think I can take pride in the fact that we're probably one of the few Indian-based consultancy firms that have worked on sustainable finance with Chilean banks as well, with the energy ministry there. But anyway, you know, on this matter, see, again, you raised the point of SLBs, sustainability-linked bonds. Now, the average ticket size, now SLB's issuance volumes have grown significantly in the last 1 year. You quoted CBI data, but then the average ticket size of the SLB out there is far higher even than green bond, which is itself already high. Now, the question is, for markets like developing or emerging markets like ours, how do we now translate that to the bulk of where, you know, the most mid-sized companies or, you know, the smaller large-scale sized companies reside? And I second the point Devrat said about basically in green finance, there's a concept of dedicated green capital. How much of capital out there is actually dedicated to sustainable and green causes? And most of that market is offshore, which is why you have higher hedging costs and which is why mostly the large issuers ultimately do this market. If you have to pull it down, that domestic dedicated green capital based mobilization is going to be a major factor. And the only way to do it is actually now for government policy to mandate allocations of domestic savings and capital allocation towards these areas. Investors follow incentives. Money is a matter of supply and demand. Incentives, basically impact that supply and demand. So ultimately, if the domestic green capital base is going to, dedicated green capital base is going to expand, you'll find a significant, exponential scale up in the entire green finance, transition finance, sustainable financing space in markets like ours, including, and I also want to add a point on that sovereign green bond that, you know, ultimately one has to also factor in the yield calculation. So while there can be one or two such landmark issuances which are put at a certain yield, at the end of the day, for markets to scale up, you need the market forces, and the market forces will demand the yield that is out there. So you have to create a conducive policy environment, a conducive system where stakeholders can engage, find the actual the price as per the book building, and that is what will really push the market. So I somehow find, you know, a lot of the industry people getting caught in debates about greenium and this and that, when in reality the basic fundamental elements of developing a financial market in this green space is yet to be done, and this is really where we need to a lot of work and a lot of policy support. And if that happens, I think we can be one of the next biggest market as far as sustainable finance is concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Iyer. Apurva, we completely run out of time, so you know the next panel is waiting. So sure. It's a fascinating discussion, and I wish we had more time. But you know, time is always a constraint. So thank you, Apurva, for moderating this session so beautifully. Mr. Iyer, Mr. Sen, Praveen, and Manish for an excellent discussion. We will call you all back again because I don't think most of our participants would have had enough of this. So thank you once again. And now we move on to the next panel. Thank you. The next panel, which is getting started with sustainability. Here, our chairman and head of sustainability committee, Anirban Ghosh would moderate this session. And we have Mr. Ashwin Shroff, Chairman, Excel Industries Limited, Rahul Singapore, MD, Indo Green Environment Private Limited, and Rajan Raje, Director, Nicom Solution. So welcome all of you. And I know you've been waiting for a long time. We've been waiting to listen to you as well. So over to you, Anirban. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandeep. Welcome, Ashwin, Rajan, Rahul, to this conversation. Delighted to have you here. You all are all people who have started your ESG journey. So why don't you begin by telling us what got you started?
Who would you like to start with?
Ashwin, you, and then staying with the principles of alphabetical order, we'll do Rahul and Rajan.
Okay, good. That's the logical order you can't question. Okay. Okay. If you like, if you permit, Anirban, what I can do is I've prepared a small note so that I could capture all the thoughts. It's about 6 to 7 minutes. So if you like, I can just take you through that and then
go ahead.
Open
go
to
ahead.
any questions and all that. Okay, fine. So, hello friends, my greetings to all of you. At the outset, I would like to compliment BCCI to conceive this very good program and topics for the discussion during the session, and including the panel discussions. And very happy that wonderful speakers are going to be sharing their thoughts, and I will be a beneficiary of that. And I have been a beneficiary of that, let me tell you. It has been wonderful. The topic for the discussion is sustainability. I would like to start by saying that, like in everything else, to achieve sustainability also, the charity begins at home. We have to start with ourselves. So we as individuals and as heads of families and our own respective organizations, we carry the responsibility to be sustainable ourselves first and ensure that our families at both the personal and corporate level have sustainable, correct, responsible behavior, and is demonstrated by our own lifestyles in our day-to-day living. One tangible dimension of sustainability can be that when correctly done, sustainability can also generate cost reduction, which as business organizations, we would all welcome, I'm sure. At the cost of slight repetition, I would just say that we are all aware of the local and global challenges that all of us are facing, the whole world is facing. Examples are the geopolitical situation, the effect of climate change, induced natural disasters, and many more. Since I am talking under the auspices of a Chamber of Commerce, it is good to talk in the context of what we as corporates can do. I would like to give some examples from my own company and our group, including our own NGOs, which we have promoted. I would also like to refer to an interesting book I came across a few months back by one Professor C.B. Bhattacharya of Pittsburgh University, US. The title of the book, and I'm sure some of you might like to read that, is very interesting. Small Actions, Big Difference. He has talked in the context of what we as corporates can do, because we are a captive audience with whom we can regularly interact. So I think his point is very correct. Since I come from a chemical industry group, but at the same time, we have always had as our tradition in the family as promoters to be a good corporate citizen. Therefore, my examples would be partly chemical oriented and partly social and environment oriented. I would like to cite examples from our unit at Bhavnagar city in Gujarat, our largest manufacturing unit at one point of time. The total factory power is renewable. It is running on wind energy completely. The full factory runs only on sewage water, which is generated by the town. The nala was flowing next to our factory. We just take it out and we treat it using a biotechnology, again developed in-house, a technology called the biofilter, which basically uses earthworms to clean up that water. Excel has been the first pioneer player in using biotechnology for converting the city waste, which all of us generate every day, into organic manure or compost, which when used in the soil, keeps the soil healthy as also reduces the consumption of synthetic fertilizers, which are all chemicals mostly. And many of them we don't make in India, we import them. Another example is how you can use chemistry and innovative chemistry to reduce the workload of the energy and the hazards. An intermediate chemical that we used to use in-house, we used to import it earlier from both US and Germany. It was made using extremely high pressure and temperature, and obviously it was needing a lot of energy. Excel developed an in-house technology to make the same product at atmospheric pressure and at low temperatures, thereby saving energy and creating sustainability. As our company has been connected with agriculture and rural communities since long, we always supported in many ways to help agriculture become sustainable. Water, a critical requirement, has been one such example. How to harvest rainwater and recharge the groundwater is one area. Introduction of drip irrigation system to use water in a very sustainable way has been another. Managing hard water using Excel's products is another one. We make water treatment chemicals which help people to manage the hard water. In the chemical space, some subjects in which we are working, for example, how to use hydrochloric acid, which is a byproduct generated not only by us, but the whole country is probably using and generating a huge amount of hydrochloric acid for which there is no market. And it has become a problem, and we need to do something about it. So we are working on how to recycle that for HCl back into chlorine, so you don't have to. Otherwise, making chlorine and transporting has a huge environmental cost. In the field of metallurgy, and as we all know, metals are used, various metals are used and produced in a very large quantity. So in the field of metallurgy, we are working on solutions to produce metals using what is known as hydrometallurgy, which is greener and environmentally sustainable to produce various metals, including some vital and critical and scarce ones. Many of them are used in the electronic field. Now coming to combining both chemicals and waste management, we are also working on electronic waste recycling, as also recycling some of the metals and elements with in-house expertise. While a lot of work is going on in-house, we also like to collaborate with solution providers which fit into the concept of sustainability. Lastly, I would like to mention our current work going on along with our consortium partners, Pidilite, besides Excel, Pidilite company, the Fevicol makers, and there's a company called Mamta Group from Ahmedabad. We have formed a consortium, and we are working on what are known as seaweeds, which grow in the ocean. They grow much faster than anything which grow on land. So obviously it is photosynthesis, takes away a lot of carbon dioxide. So there's a way of pulling out the CO2 in a very, very nice way. And the idea is not only to help the climate change part, but also providing green raw materials for blue and sustainable and inclusive economy. This is what we are working on. It's a big project, and we are happy to be participating in that. And we look forward to seeing some very good results coming out of that. So thank you very much again, BCCI, for inviting me and sharing my thoughts. Thank you.
Wonderful, Ashwin. You captured very well why you all got started and all the things you're doing. You even talked about things you're going to do later. So while Rahul and Rajan speak, let me share a couple of thoughts with you which you can mull on, and you can talk about it when we come back to you. So one thing is, if you were to advise other companies to get started, what would you ask them to do? And a second thing is, a lot of people are taking lots of actions. How would an organization know that it is doing enough? So let me leave these two questions with you. And in keeping with consistency, Rahul, Rajan, let me expand the scope of your first intervention from what got you started to include what are the things you're doing now as well. Rahul, you'll need to unmute the microphone.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, Anirban and the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industries to invite us on this, invite me on this panel. In fact, I would say, in fact, I have been, these 2 hours have been very, very insightful. I have been the sustainable journey for some time, but it was always amazing to see environment entrepreneurs talk about their journeys, their startups. We are a decade-old company, and we started very humbly with just being a partner for a large European company to set up waste recycling plants. From there on till today, today we are a dominant players in setting up waste recycling plants across India and Middle East, with our offices in India as well as in Istanbul, Turkey, from where we handle our Middle East markets. And we are very well entrenched into consulting also into Europe and helping companies to become more operationally profitable. As I heard all these companies talk about, all the panelists kept on talking about sustainability, and I'm a little disappointed when the whole sustainability discussions all across start and by and large very much end towards the renewable energy arena. And this is where we all, equipment providers of waste recycling plants. And in fact, I would say even Excel Industries, whom I have been an ardent follower of what their activities are, and we know of them very well. And in fact, amazing work what they have done in this field, sometimes get pitted against the return on investments vis-a-vis getting into the environment, need kind of an pitch. And in fact, my whole, in fact, I'm too young in this industry to talk more larger words and lot of insights. But what we feel is over working over last 10 years across continents, across a lot of countries, that we've built a lot of large plants today. In fact, we are the winners of qualifiers for the Frost and Sullivan Best Practices Award, also in the automotive tire sector and all that. I feel sometimes that there is so much of things that we can do, and we need some impetus, some incentivized policies coming from the government to help the financial sector, which I was listening to all of them, including the insurance, the funding arena, all of them have. We need to also start focusing on beyond just the green energy kind of thing. Like we are looking at doing a lot of work with plastics. We set up plants which are able to make plastics into fuel, tire into fuel, a lot of other new forward integration products made out of waste that is generated. There's so much of waste which exists, which needs to be recycled, and we don't get that kind of a support from anywhere. And I feel that is sometimes the limiting factor on going to the next level. Having said that, I think these kind of forums are going to be very helpful for all of us. In fact, I would have been very pleased if anyone from the center also would have been also a witness to what our discussions are going on, so that many such discussions would eventually get into a policy making framework. Because I'm sure you and me, or we all agree that in India we need to a policy. A policy is better than no policy. And then when we get a policy, then comes the policy. And until that doesn't happen, major changes don't happen and don't reflect in the real world. So this is what, in fact, I would like to hear from other panelists also, what their views are on how all the sectors can also be looked upon differently, and not just a matter of compliance. Thank you.
Rahul, what I gather is that your organization got into the sustainability space because it saw an opportunity to solve climate problems which were beyond or other than clean energy problems. Fair point, well made. Appreciate your lament on the fact that most of the money goes towards energy, clean energy. But that's probably because 74% of the world's emissions get generated by or caused by the generation and consumption of energy, and that solutions are emerging. I'm actually delighted that you highlighted how solutions can be brought about by leveraging waste. It solves many problems more than waste, actually, because what we don't talk about is the negative effect wastes have on water bodies around the world and how it limits their ability to sequester carbon. But more about that later. We've got a sense of why you got started and things that you're doing. And like I mentioned to Ashwin, when I come back to you, please tell us about how you would advise people who are getting started. And what was the other question that I asked you, Ashwin?
How do I know that I'm achieving sustainability? I think that was the question.
Right. Okay. So, Rahul, those for you. Rajan, your turn.
Thank you, Anirban. Honestly speaking, I think I really don't know whether I'm a fit here in the panel, because most of the people I have heard are large companies, large players. But honestly speaking, to me, sustainability is being responsible. And it has to start from an individual. I honestly believe that, because the resources what we have, the environment what we have is useful for everybody. So if we make a beginning from ourselves, start being responsible in utilizing the resources like water, air, land, then I think a contribution what we will make in sustainability is going to be immense. Now, as an organization, if I have to talk, we are a small scale company, a turnover of around 30 crores. But in spite of a small turnover compared to others like Excel or everybody else, what we have always followed, we are all technocrats. So what we have started is all our products are environmental friendly. I mean, that is a principle on which our product development works. We have our own R&D center who creates the products. We work in water, drinking water. We work in polymer. We work in agriculture, pre and post harvest. We work in disinfections. We work in home and personal care. And we also have products which are based on our technology. And I'm very proud to say that each and every product, whether it is a biocide, it is a disinfectant, whether it is an agricultural input product or food preservation product, everything is environmental friendly. In the organization, what we have begun is we created awareness about the sustainability, created awareness about how the environment needs a protection, how it needs to be used conservatively. And that has made a big difference. Like everybody says, I mean, even for a smaller organization, starting anything in sustainability, people look at it as an expense. And like Rahul or Ashwin Bhai said, that it has to be looked at as a future saving. And it is not only a saving for the organization, for ourselves, but for the entire community or entire environment. Because we as a management, we strongly believe that whether you save the water, you will need an ATP or STP. If you want to save electricity, you will need alternate energy source. If you want to keep the air clean, you will need air scrubbers or air purifiers. But ultimately, in spite of the initial expenditure, what we make, the final outcome is going to be beneficial for everyone, including yourself. So that is what we have made. We have ETP in spite of our size of operation. We have air scrubbers, again, in spite of our size. We are going to invest into a solar power generation for our captive use, if not for the grid. But all these initiatives have started. We have water saving gadgets put on each and every tap in the organization. We encourage the use of natural light. We minimize the use of artificial light. We encourage the people, because we are only on the second floor, we encourage the people not to use the lift, walk for the saving as well as the health benefits. We have started planting the trees. We have plants even in the organization. The software upgradation, encouraging people not to print wherever possible. And as a result of that, saving of paper and everything. What we have done in terms of the product development, I mean, some products I would like to really mention here, that the foods wastage. I mean, today we are talking about 35% food wastage world over. I mean, people have been talking about this wastage and wastage reduction. So we have been developing the packaging, which will retard the ripening, and as a result of that, reduce the wastage by 35%. We have coatings for corrugated boxes. We have bags, plastic bags, in which if you store the produce lasts much longer. We have products which reduce the wastage of seafood and the meat by almost 50%. We have agricultural products which are organically certified. They are not natural, but they are organically certified, which improve the output or productivity by 35-40%. Then all the biocides which are used for agriculture, or fungicides or virucides which are used in the agriculture or in home and personal care, are all ecologically friendly. They do not damage the environment. So these are some of the initiatives which as an organization we have begun. And the biggest thing what we have done is we have a product which destroys the flexible plastic. I mean, today Anirban mentioned that typically people talk about the plastic being converted into a microplastics, which goes into the water bodies or the landfill, and then the land as well as the water is damaged beyond repair. So we have a product which you add into the plastic while manufacturing. In the presence of sunlight or in the absence of sunlight, the degradation of the plastic goes to the level of wax. It does not get converted into a microplastic. So it becomes a wax. As a result of that, this accelerated degradation of plastic will be environmental friendly. The land will remain cultivable. The water will keep remaining drinkable, or even the aquaculture is not going to be damaged. So these are some of the initiatives which we very strongly propagate for sustainability.
Thank you for all those lovely examples, Rajan. Many of these any individual can practice himself or herself. But you and your organization are shining example that an MSME can act on climate without somebody else sitting on his or her back. So I hope you inspire many others to act on climate and even make a good business out of it, because without these solutions, we cannot solve the climate problem. Let me go back to Ashwin Bhai. Ashwin Bhai, what would you advise people who are getting started, and how will you know that as an organization you have done enough?
Okay. Very interesting question, and the answers can be very long, very short, whatever. So you asked why and how do I know whether I'm making a progress? So I would say how and why. One is, I would say it's a question of survival. We have realized climate change effects, many other disasters which are taking place have been taking place for, it's like a slow poison which has been there, and the sooner we realize, the better. Otherwise, I think the survival of the human race is itself at stake. So don't do it for anybody else, do it for your own survival. The second one, which I broadly touched on, is that most of the solution, I would not say all of them, most of the solutions that you go for sustainability achievement would also help you to achieve cost reduction. So do it for your bottom line, do it for your financial performance, which is also important, but not the most important. And the last one, I would say, if you do sustainability initiatives, you may have a license to operate by the government, by the pollution board, etc., etc. But we are living in a time when the community's approval of your being there as a neighbor has also become extremely important. We know of many cases, I'm sure all of us are aware, that a company has been closed down, not by any government action, but because the people did not want them as a neighbor, as a polluting neighbor and all that. So this is negative side. And if you, let's say, you know that, for example, if a factory, if you are drawing water from the nearby area, if you deprive the community, then they are not going to like you. If you keep on throwing out gases with odor and all that, they are not going to let you survive very easily. Either it can become political pressure, media pressure, government pressure, whatever. So like I said, do it for your own survival, do it for your own long-term survival, be a good citizen, do it. And in the bargain, if you achieve cost reduction, then you are also a good attractive investment from the investor's point of view. The other question that you asked, how do I know whether I'm making progress? I think some of these will be fairly visible. You don't need a very big sophisticated device or testing device to tell you. But there could be others. And these days there are a lot of certifiers. Unfortunately, even let's say certifying can easily become a business. So I have my own views on ESG, which has become a good dhanda, whether people follow ESG or not. And one quarrel which I have with ESG is that it only makes the producer responsible. But on the other hand, wo hamari economy kharab ho gayi hai, so push GDP. So encourage more consumption, including consumerism. The bankers will say, don't worry, aapke paas paisa nahi hai, main EMI dunga, but kharcha karo. So I think these are all bad habits which we need to get out of as early as possible. Mr. Modi's mission for life, which he recently published, 75 habits, it's like introspection. So introspect and learn from that whatever you can do. And on the energy front, I will just make my last comment and then I'll stop. I think on the energy front, which is, as we are discussing climate change and how to do it, I would say the moment you go out to the market or anywhere, to a mall, to any office, the amount of unnecessary power in the form of electricity and AC that we keep on using, I would say achieving anything from 30 to 50% of the CO2 reduction and decarbonization, because that's a nice sophisticated name, I think is quite easy. We use too much power, and I think we need to curb that in various forms. We use electricity, but reduction is very, very easily possible. It only needs your introspection and asking, why am I using so much? Mr. Modi recently gave a very good example that I put on the AC at night. I set it at 18 degrees. Then I have a nice blanket to cover me. Instead of that, Bhaiya, put it at 24. Then you won't need that blanket and you will save the power. So these are examples of what can be done. And as Mr. Rajan rightly said, begin with yourself. Don't wait for others to do it. And I think that's how we will achieve it. Thank you very much.
Very good, easy to understand reasons to get started. Thank you very much. I hope the audience takes away some of the suggestions you had. And whoever wishes to get started, I think there is no better case. I will add one more thing to your AC story, which I've discovered works very well. Put the AC on 24, put the timer on 1 hour. You will go to sleep. The AC will also go to sleep. You will not need the AC after you've gone to sleep.
Very true.
Very good suggestion.
All right.
Okay.
Rahul, your turn.
Before we turn to Rahul, just this is the book that I referred to by Dr. C.B. Bhattacharya. I hope you can see it.
I've just noted it down. So the first thing which I'm going to do is I'm going to buy. Thank you so much.
And we do a lot of work for community. So this is our CSR report, just for your information. I'll be happy to share it with any of you who would like.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Ashwin bhai. Yes, Rahul, how would you get people to get started, and when do you know that you've done enough?
Anirban, in fact, I would second everyone here, sitting here. I'm sure we all will come back to what Rajan said very rightly and very, very simply is, if it is to be, it is to me, right? And in fact, this is exactly what we have seen doesn't happen, right? We all have a lot of discussions about environment and this large jargons that we talk about. I'm so sorry for saying this, but we come back to basics. We don't even pick up something if you see in the road going on, and you just keep on lamenting about the government to take care of everything, but these basic things also we don't take charge of ourselves.
Correct.
In fact, I would say in my own residence, I'll make a statement here. I am responsible for seeing that the waste is segregated or not, wet waste and dry waste. It is not about the people who work for us. It's not about anyone else. If I don't go to that brass tack level, like Mr. Modi says, right? In fact, we all love him because he's taken jargons out of all discussions. He goes down to brass tacks in the most crudest language ever, but which we all understand is the only language which we all actually understand and which goes right to our brains. Is that how much are we practicing what we are preaching? I have been to conclaves and seminars across the country, across the globe, and I've seen people coming out and throwing cigarette packets and cigarette butts here and there just after a sustainability conclave. So I just come back disillusioned, thinking this is something which is supposed to be talked about but not practiced. So I'm saying is that it is painful to say this in a forum like this. I don't know, some people might not like this because they would have done it right away. But that's what I have learned. It's not something which we have learned to practice over years, not born with it. But yes, one fine day decided I'm not good. I'm going to be true to myself about what if I preach something, I'm going to put my heart to practice it. I think if I can do it, then I see my family doing it. If I see my family doing it, there are other families, they start doing it, and then the whole community follows, right? If it is to me, it is to be, it is to be. So that's exactly what I would advise everyone, is that one trash at a time, this is the starting point. And of course, I would say that Ashwin Bhai will agree with me. In India, saving energy is not by choice, unfortunately. We don't have that luxury. Industries have had to look at ways and means to cut down electricity consumptions to make their ends meet, because the sustainability sector or other sectors have had to do this for quite some time. Having said that, every organization now, I feel in the last 5 years, has really woken up because of compliances as well as energy audits and other factors also which are coming along to see how we can sustain, we can do things better, we can do more sustainable matters. In fact, I would like to state that there have been times, in fact, we have been, as I mentioned, we have been consulting some waste management companies in Europe, mainland Europe, to help them to become profitable by just implementing some things which we do naturally here. Because these people still have, with all the gadgets which is there, they still have to, a lot of the frugalities which are there practiced by the Indian industry are still, Europe has to learn a lot of things from us. In fact, Ashwin Bhai Smile also says it all, that this is exactly what we can also bring into the world from the sustainability point of view. Sometimes the Western world tries to tell us about sustainability, but I think we have been born sustainable, or I would say we have been pressured into becoming sustainable for a long time, but we didn't know what captions to put it into. We have been recycling naturally. Our parents, our grandparents, and everyone have been recycling, everything, whatever they could for years and years. But now the words are put into our mouth saying you need to be sustainable. In fact, in a European forum, I was telling them that you need to learn from India I don't think we need to learn. We can of course learn from everyone, but we need to do this. We speak English, but one day you will have to learn Hindi to learn from us about how to become more sustainable. Yes, I am a patriotic gentleman, and with due respect, and I said there is lots the world can learn from us. And of course, we can all as a global community, we can learn from everyone else. So yes, water conservation, water recycling, energy conservation, and renewable energy recycling, which is our forte, is some place where I've been, hitting the wall again and again with Ministry of Environment and Forestry also, and all that stuff. Yes, there have been changes in the last 10 years, and there's a long way to go. So recycle, reuse, is what I would advise everyone to move forward. Thank you.
Wonderful, Rahul. It is indeed true, and even in our government, in many publications, talks about how as a country we have had sustainable practices. But it's also true that scarcity is the mother of sustainability.
Correct.
If you look at all the underdeveloped nations, you will find low per capita emission, low per capita waste generation, low per capita all good things, all bad things. And just as scarcity is the mother of sustainability, prosperity is its biggest enemy. And that is where probably we as Indians run a risk, because our carbon footprint, Rahul, yours and mine, will be much higher than the carbon footprint of, let's say, the lady who comes and cleans in our house. And therefore, there are many Indians today whose carbon footprint is very similar to a European's carbon footprint.
Yeah.
And this is the journey, and we have to, and we know that development is happening. India is growing as a nation, prosperity is increasing, our GDP is increasing. So our risk is that our emissions should grow at a lower pace than they did for the Western economy. And I mention it because actually all three of you provide solutions to make it happen. And that is the uniqueness of this panel. Usually we have people who say, okay, we are using less energy, we are producing less weight, dealing with what is called scope 1 and scope 2 problems within the organization. But we will all win when organizations like yours provide solutions for the larger number of people to live a low carbon life. So having said that, and by the way, Ashwin Bhai, your AC conversation has been appreciated in the Q&A box. Take a look at it. And let me come to Rajan now.
Right. Okay. So I honestly believe that, yes, I mean, being responsible is the beginning of everything. I mean, sustainability for sure. And here again, my personal opinion, but I believe the education to be responsible should begin at the school level, because that is where the values are getting created. And once those values get created, they not only get cemented, but I also believe that if the child tells something to the parents that, look, Dada or Mama, you did this wrong or this shouldn't be done, I think the impact of that statement is far more serious than someone grown up telling them, because at that level, the ego plays part. But once the child tells, I think it doesn't hit, or rather it hits at a right place and not emotionally. So if we begin there, I think our journey to sustainability or journey of being responsible will be far superior, far quicker. Because see, no matter what, we as a country, we are definitely going to do. We talk about a 5 trillion economy, we talk about 10 trillion economy, we talk about 25 trillion economy in next 25 years. If that happens, the profligacy is going to be a part of life anyway, no matter if you like it or not. I mean, sorry, I am probably a generation younger to you, and I am obviously going to like the consumerism. But in spite of that consumerism, am I being responsible is what not only me, but everyone has to see. If we do that, I think our carbon footprint, in spite of our development, national development, social development, will be under control. I am also very, very strong optimist. I mean, I strongly believe if we as a society, we have survived for thousands of years. If we talk from Ramayana, Mahabharata, and we are still surviving, and we are also growing, we are progressing in every direction, then obviously we have found ways to overcome the problems we have created ourselves. I mean, that is the best part of the human mankind. I mean, we create problems, we also find out the solutions to survive and to grow and to prosper. And that will definitely keep us going. Yes, a great thing that the understanding and the awareness about sustainability or the environment is growing in last 10 years, because we have seen the negatives. We have seen the bad impacts, and we have realized that if this habit or our ignorance about the sustainability continues, we are going to be doomed. And that understanding will make us more responsible. That is my very optimist opinion. But yes, I mean, we have to be responsible for sure. We have to find ways to protect the environment. We have to find the products which are going to be economically sustainable, or which are going to protect the economy. And that becomes a responsibility of every individual. And that's where I would like to start. Thank you.
Very true, very true. So you're saying that begin from home, begin with the children, and that has immense power. Completely understand. Before I close, let me share with you how we in Mahindra looked at the question of how do you know you're doing enough?
May I just share two thoughts very quickly?
Yes, Ashwin bhai.
One is, let's say either you are told to do it or you do it yourself, or you are encouraged. So I'm remembering two of our prime ministers, Lal Bahadur Shastri and Modi Sahab. Lal Bahadur Shastri, when we were having acute food shortage, had requested, appealed to everybody that if every Indian, at that time we were 50, 60 crores, if every Indian skips one meal per week, we will have some surplus food. One, that's a voluntary way of doing appeal. What Mr. Modi is doing also is appeal, but during Corona time, wearing a mask was compulsory. If you don't wear a mask, you can be put behind bar, police will take you away, fine and all that. So I think we have a choice, either do it yourself or it will be imposed. So I think it's better that we do it voluntarily.
Absolutely.
Very true.
It doesn't work.
In fact, that's a big problem, the risk we are facing with climate, that if we don't do things quickly, it will have to be forced down on us.
Absolutely.
So I was just sharing with you how we looked at the question of how do you know you're doing enough? So from an emissions perspective, I read somewhere that 100 corporations contribute to 71% of emissions. And so we said, okay, we will not contribute any more than is necessary. So we will get to net zero. And when we are net zero, we will know, okay, we have done at least our fair share, and then continue from there. Similarly, in the case of water, we said in operations, we will be water positive. We will harness more water than we consume. And only from a fresh water perspective. So then all the other recycled water, water productivity, all those solutions come into play. We also said from a business perspective, harnessing water 1,000 kilometers away doesn't make any sense. So we will try and go off the grid, the water grid, as much as possible. And some colleagues of mine worked very hard. So 2 of our factories don't use fresh water from the municipality for 250 days of the year. A similar thought happened on waste. We said that, look, we can't stop all the waste generation in the world. But what we can definitely stop is send no waste to landfill. And so there is a program called Zero Waste to Landfill. And these are all things you do within your campus. We also said that, okay, if to solve the climate problem, you have to sequester carbon, we will continue with the program of planting 1 million trees a year, which had started a long time ago. At that time, we weren't looking at it from a climate perspective. We were trying to solve the country's deforestation problem. And we said we'll continue with that. And now colleagues of mine have agreed to scale it up to 5 million trees a year, about 4 or 5 years from now. But just like all three of you have looked at opportunities for new products and new services to solve the climate problem, we had to do that too, because we made diesel using cars. So we said electric vehicles, and that's why we'd invested so long ago and became pioneers in the EV journey in India. What you probably haven't heard is that our buildings business, they only build green buildings. They are the only company in the country to have never built anything which was not green. Right? And they have now launched India's first net zero residential complex, net zero energy residential complex. So these were all results of the answer to the question, how do you know you're doing enough? And then, of course, the world decided to go to science-based targets. And 20 of our businesses went and signed on science-based targets. I wanted to share this with you and the diehard members of the audience who are still with us, because it's a question which all of us will ask. We will do a lot of things, but at some point in time, we'll have to ask, are we doing enough? Are we missing out on something? And that's the thinking that drove us there in the Mahindra. Thank you very much for your sharing. There was a lot we learned from you in terms of how you got started, what are the things you're doing, how there is opportunity in sustainability, different kinds of opportunity, and why people should get started on their work. So thank you very much. It's 6:15 now, time for us to stop. Thank you.
To answer your question, there is never enough. I mean, the moment you feel, am I doing enough? I mean, you are going to read into some of the other problems. So
absolutely,
everyone, I mean, you are never going to do enough. Keep doing more and more.
I agree. But all I'm saying is you set a bar and at least get there. Once, by the time you get there, there will be more to do.
I'm not repeating that. I'm just telling everyone that it is never enough.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Shroff, Rahul, Rajan, and Anirban for those wonderful initiative examples which you have shown us from Mahindra. So Ritesh also, Ritesh, just before we go to the vote of thanks, so we have a small video from Anjali. It's a 5-minute video. Anjali was supposed to be present with us today, but a flight got delayed. So she just recorded it from the airport and sent it. And that's the reason this was supposed to be before this session. But since it came late to us, I thought we will just have that video played. It's a special address on sustainability is the next digital. So Aneha, could you please put it on?
Yes, sir.
Jai
Sound.
Yeah. We're looking at the.
He was panelist. He was a panelist.
Are you?
So 1 minute. 1 minute.
Yeah.
The ex-president of PCCI.
Stop. Anjali is the immediate past president of Bombay Chamber, and she's really pushed the sustainability agenda a lot within the chamber. So I think there's some problem with the volume. So what I'll do is I'll post it on our website and also send it to all our members so that we don't struggle more on with the technology front. So over to you, Ritesh, for winding this up and the vote of thanks.
No, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for a fabulous, insightful and intriguing afternoon. Every time I attend any conclave, any conversation on sustainability, I always take over lots of learning. There are many aspects of this. I'm not sure all of us have fully understood what it would take for India to become net zero at some point in time, the way they support, the systems, the activities, collaboration, and resources to make what we need to do. At Hindustan Unilever, where I work as CFO, for us to make sustainable living commonplace is a top part of our purpose and our strategy. We do believe that it is integral to our business model. And it's genuinely a topic very close to my heart. One of the topics which Anjali was going to refer into her talk basically was there are two mega trends today, a trend of digital and a trend of sustainability. In my mind, I'm sure also to Anjali's mind, having spoken to her more than once on this topic, these two elements, every organization will have to get it right in times to come. That will determine the strength of their business model, the longevity of the business model, and their capability to do value creation in times to come. Either digital or sustainability, if not driven well in years to come, it will impact capability of the organization. And which is why, in my mind, sustainability is not something that you end up doing, which is good. We end up doing because it is so integral to our business model. It will define how we run our business. It will define how we conduct ourselves as leaders. And which is why today this topic is not a topic limited to boardroom. It's a topic which is relevant from boardroom to every classroom. And every part, every function of the organization gets involved in driving this. Few areas which come to my mind as a closing thought as we close this session. Number one, absolutely to build a buoyant climate tech ecosystem to support the climate transition plan is very important. This will absolutely require partnership, both public and private, to make it come alive, and continued experimentation is what will have to be done in this space. Some experimentations will be successful, we would be able to scale up, and some experimentation might not be successful, on which we need to fail fast and move on. Second, in my mind, this will require time, technology, and patience, because it's not something which will be able to get the job done in a shorter period of time. A lot of technology will have to be worked through, and it will require patience as we ensure we end up navigating very tough climate and other challenges before we end up executing. The third thought I have in this point is, this is not an area one would need to get competitive advantage over the companies. I think this is one area where all of us, all companies, government bodies, everybody will have to come together and collaborate together to make a net impact of net zero on the economy, on the system, on the organizations, and in the country. So this is an area I genuinely believe we don't need to compete against each other organization, but collaborate to make an impact and decision together. The last element I thought I'll bring before I thank all the great speakers we had today was that this will also require, in my mind, a multi-year performance management, because any plan, it is as good as the execution of the plan. Any strategy, it is as good as we are able to execute the strategy. So multi-year performance management, very transparent reporting and governance around that, in my mind, will be a cornerstone of how we are able to progress as India Inc. And what a fabulous job done by all the speakers today and all the panelists. Sincere thanks from Bombay Chambers to all of you for you to take time of this opportunity, come out and be with us, share your inputs, share your leadership thoughts with us, and surely each of us take away many lessons from what you covered today. So many thanks to all of you for doing that. I would also like to thank our President, Nilesh Bhai, past presidents, members of Bombay Chamber Board, and all our distinguished guests who have taken time to come and attend this session of Sustainability Conclave at Bombay Chamber. Our sincere thanks also to our sponsors, HSBC, KPMG, Excel Industries, and Hindustan Unilever for supporting this event. At Chambers, we do many activities and a lot of things get organized, and kudos always goes to teams. In this case, the committee that we have on sustainability, led by Nirban, fabulous amount of work done, again to bring a very impactful conclave. And I can never ever finish any thank without thanking our Secretary of Bombay Chambers, without which none of this would ever be possible. So again, a big thank you to all the attendees for being a great audience today. And I wish that all of us collaborate and work together to really make India come alive with our plans of net zero in times to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ritesh, for those closing remarks and summarizing everything up. And as you referred to Anjali's, one of her talking points would be the next digital. So what we'll do is, as I've just mentioned, we'll post it on our website. So request all of you to go there and have a look at it. So have a great evening and